Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku's Expulsion Changed Hero World. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Come on guys, it's about to start. Hagakure called as she bounced up and down in her seat, the flattening of the cushion the only clue she was there, as she was in costume at the time. You don't have to be so loud about it, Ojiro pointed out from the seat next to her. She knows that, Uraraka replied as she walked into the room. But this is the first annual hero ranking since we graduated. You can't blame her for being excited. There's nothing exciting about hearing about all the extras who lost to me, Bakugo said, slouching back in his chair. A good number of eyes rolled at that, but no one said anything. After all, in the 3 years the Hell class, as the media had dubbed them, had been together, they'd tightened together and formed a close-knit, if dysfunctional, family. It was the only way some of them had even survived to this point. And while they didn't stick together 100% of the time after graduation, they still kept in contact. They had teamed up on occasion, some made it a point to work in the same agencies, and today was the first time all the surviving members were together at once. The reason was the hero rankings. This was their first year as fully fledged heroes, and they were eager to see how many of them made it into the top 50, so they all gathered together at Yaoyorozu's mansion to watch it together. Well, almost all of them at any rate. Shinso was on patrol at the moment, but he didn't care much for the rankings anyway. Thought they were a waste of time. In addition, he felt like he was something of a late addition to the group, having not been there for the USJ incident. And they knew that at least some of them were bound to make it onto the rankings. After all, their frequent harassment by the League of Villains meant they were already forced kicking and screaming into the public eye. Todoroki Shudo already had a head start in that regard. Being the son of the number 2 hero, no one cared that Endeavor had moved up since All Might's death. No one ever truly considered him number 1. But the entire class had gained considerable notoriety after events like the USJ attack and the Kamino incident. Even before their official graduation, the Hell class were already considered heroes to some extent. Ooh, it's starting! Uraraka gasped as the ranking began, and some guy none of them would remember the name of began introducing them. We can see that round face. Bakugo growled. This is so cool. I can hardly contain myself. Hagakure whispered. Bakugo rolled his eyes. It's not like you'll be on it anyway, Invisib, he grumbled. You and Mindf are both underground. I know that, but still. And with that, the banter went quiet as the ranking began. And right out of the gate, said the voice on the TV, we have a graduate of UA's Hell class making the list at number 50, the shining hero, can't stop twinkling. This was accompanied by a photo of Aoyama in all his fabulosity. Only 50? Monju! Aoyama groaned. I told you, Jur piped up from behind him, you're not going to get far with a name like that. Even still, the top 50 is nothing to sneeze at, Yaoyorozu said comfortingly. There are hundreds of heroes competing after all. You'll do better next year. The rankings continued, with UA's hero courses filling out a lot of the 40s. Uraraka was honestly surprised she made it onto the ranking at all, but there she was, at hashtag admittedly she was hoping to be a bit higher up, but she was predominantly a rescue hero, and rescue heroes didn't get as much recognition as the ones who went after villains, like Bakugo, for example. Motherfjar! That who was currently pitching a hissy fit over being ranked at hashtag, what, did you really think you were going to be number 1 your first year? Asked Jairu. Of course not, I'm not FNG stupid. But I was expecting top 20 at the very least. He stood up and stomped away. Wait, Baku bro. Kirishima called. You'll miss the dash. Don't care, he shouted as he slammed the door on the way out. One collective sigh of exasperation later, they turned their attention back to the screen. And at number 31, we have something special. A graduate from the Hamada Institute, and the first quirkless pro hero, the analytic hero, Sleeper Hit. As the announcer said this, a photo of the hero in question appeared on the screen. He had unruly green hair, large and deceptively innocent-looking eyes whose color matched his hair, skin dotted with freckles, and a steel guard around his lower face. The class began to murmur amongst themselves. A quirkless hero? Mina whispered. Is that even possible? Evidently it is, Ojiro responded. Wow, and he even ranked higher than Bakubro. That's so manly. Question? Kaminari asked. What's the Hamada Institute? I never heard of them. Yaoyorozu turned to face him. It's a smaller high school up north, in Akudo, she explained. Mostly they specialize in support, but they do have a smaller hero course. Interesting, Jairu said, lazily. Now if you hadn't been so busy chatting, you might have caught that they're going to interview him after the rankings. We should watch it, Uraraka suggested, with various voices of assent replying to her. They were all curious about the first ever quirkless hero, but Uraraka couldn't help but look at the plain, yet strangely appealing face on the screen. I swear I've seen him before. Maybe it'll come to me once I see him without that mask. The ranking continued on into the 20s. There were several congratulations when they announced that the number 27 spot went to the Frostbite hero, Promise. Shudo said nothing, just giving a neutral. Similar congratulations were offered when Kriati was announced to be sitting right on the number 20 spot, which Yaoyorozu humbly thanked them for. Shortly afterwards, Kirishima bashfully accepted their congratulations for reaching the number 18 spot, making him the highest-ranked hero of their class, much to their surprise. There weren't many other surprises after that. Lemillion had skyrocketed in popularity once he recovered from his injuries at the Shai Hasaikai raid and had emerged at the number 10 spot. He was already a universally beloved figure, with his genuine smile and offbeat permeation quirk. Plus, Hagakure owed him for helping her finally get a proper costume. Endeavor was still in the number 1 spot because of course he was. Siro, Koda, and Shoji all sighed, being the only 3 of the 17 members of the class who didn't make it onto the rankings. Unless you counted the underground heroes Hagakure, Shinso, and Tokoyami, who didn't get ranked because that would defeat the entire purpose of going underground. They had a bit of a break before the interview was bound to start, so Sato offered to make some cookies for everyone since they were all here. Well, aside from Bakugu, obviously. Finally, the time arrived and Sleeper Hit was on screen, dressed up in full costume, including the mouthguard, which didn't really help Uraraka identify him. He was seated across from the host, a woman with dark red hair that had what appeared to be strobe lights gently pulsating through it like a deep-sea creature, no doubt an effect of her quirk. It's good to have you on with us, Sleeper. Likewise, Shishina-san. His voice was youthful, and yet something about it seemed a little off, as though he was trying to suppress a stutter. You know, when I first made my debut about a year ago, a lot of people just kinda wrote me off as a gimmick hero, a novelty. That's definitely true, Shishina responded. And I have to admit, I was initially of that same mindset, so, egg on my face, huh? No hard feelings, Sleeper replied, waving his hand and laughing it off. I don't blame you for not believing in me. I don't think anyone did aside from my own mother. Well, that's a little depressing, Uraraka thought to herself as she continued to try and place where she saw this guy before now. She knew it had to be somewhere. But that was before you almost single-handedly took down the Nensho cartel, wasn't it? Uraraka had heard about that incident. She only knew the broad strokes of the incident. She was hospitalized from overusing her quirk at the time, and hadn't really paid any attention to the hero involved until now. The Nensho cartel were a criminal organization that had sprung up in Mizudafu right under Yue's nose. Their crimes were marked by a propensity for civilian casualties and collateral damage, usually involving fire. That way the heroes were too preoccupied with getting the civilians to safety and containing the fire, and they weren't shy about taking hostages. But then one day, one civilian happened to walk a little too close to a heist in progress, and their leader immediately took him hostage, threatening to kill him if the police came any closer. They weren't counting on that civilian having taser gloves and a combination of smoke and flashbang grenades. With the element of surprise on his hands, Sleeper Hit took down a majority of the gang's strongest fighters that day, dealing a crippling blow that the cartel never recovered from and eventually led to their arrest. I've been told I'm kinda plain looking, he said, chuckling. And I don't stand out much. So it's not all that hard to get mistaken for a civilian. It kept happening a lot in my early career, and I hated it at first, but then I realized I could use it to my advantage. Which is why I refused to take off the faceplate for the interview. That strategy won't exactly work if I show my full face on live TV. If that's the case, then why not become an underground hero? Shishina pressed. Because that would defeat the entire purpose of my becoming a hero in the first place. Explain. It's no secret that quirk discrimination is a really big problem. Some people can juggle mountains and other people have a cactus for a head. People with undesirable or mundane quirks are told they don't measure up. Shishina nodded in understanding, likely having been teased for her unremarkable, purely cosmetic quirk. But it's even worse for people who don't have one at all, like myself. You've probably seen the statistics. I know I have. Heck, I've lived the statistics. Unemployment, depression, suicide rates, they're depressingly high for someone without a quirk. And when I became a hero, he went on, facing the camera, I wanted to show people that even if you can only, say, extend your neck half an inch, or change your eye color, or don't have any sort of power at all, that despite all that, you can do it. That's such a pure motive, Uraraka thought as she once again felt a little guilty for her own reasons for becoming a hero. She didn't feel as self-conscious about it nowadays, though, as her classmates and fellow heroes assured her there was nothing wrong with making a living. But here was Sleeper Hit, exemplifying the true meaning of the word, hero. Well, I'd say you're succeeding in that goal so far, the interviewer said. Ever since that arrest, charities to fight quirk discrimination have reported a 138% net increase in donations. Wait, really? Sleeper said, his eyes widening, sounding genuinely surprised. I didn't know that. Uraraka giggled. He was just so gosh darn sincere. Well, it was a pretty recent report, Shishina chuckled, evidently also amused by his reaction. She sighed, her tone lowering a bit. You know, the Hamada Institute isn't very well known. A lot of people only take their hero course because they couldn't make it into UA or Shiketsu. And when they graduate, they don't really last long in the field. But despite all that, you rocketed from near obscurity to placing alongside UA's Hell class. Sleeper's face fell slightly, probably only perceptible to someone who was intently studying his face to figure out where she'd seen it before. Interesting. With that in mind, do you think you would have liked to have studied at UA had you been given the chance? The interviewer asked. Sleeper hesitated before he took a deep breath. Actually, it's funny you should ask that, he said, sounding strangely tired and bitter. Nah, that couldn't be it. I actually did make it into UA. Passed the entrance exam and everything. Qualified for Class A even. You did? But he looks roughly our age, Uraraka thought. The interviewer looked genuinely surprised. That would mean he would have, wait. Then how did you end up at Hamada? No way, it can't be. I was expelled the first day because I didn't have a quirk that would help me throw a baseball. It's that boy who saved me from the zero-pointer. The boy that Aizawa expelled the first day. For years earlier. Midoriya Izuku could hardly believe it even now. He thought for sure he'd flunked the exam, but out of nowhere, those rescue points propelled him from the single digits to being in the top class. He didn't even know rescue points were a thing when he went to rescue the nice girl from that rubble, which he supposed was the entire point of the exercise. Taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, he looked up at the massive door to Class 1A. Well, this is it, Izuku, he thought. Today's the first day of the rest of your life, and these will be your classmates for the next 3 years. I just hope that Kaken and that scary glasses guy aren't in this class. Steeling himself, he stepped through the door. It's the first day and you're already ruining school property, you delinquent, the scary glasses guy yelled. You're kidding me, right? Kaken smirked. Did your old school put a stick up your or were you just born that way? That I don't know what I was expecting. Trying to make himself as small and invisible as possible, he casually strode towards his assigned seat and tried not to be noticed, until he realized his assigned seat was directly behind Kaken's. A point made clear when the explosive blonde turned and locked eyes with the broccoli-headed boy. Well, life was fun while it lasted. Deku, he yelled, his hands already sparking. What the F do you think you're doing here? Kaken. Izuku stammered as he could already feel the impending burns. This is my classroom, same as yours. Bullsh dash. Then, as quickly as they started, the small explosions ceased. Kaken looked down in disbelief, before looking up at Izuku as if he was accusing him of somehow deactivating his quirk. That was when one of the room's inhabitants decided to make himself known. Unbelievable. You're already fighting and class hasn't even started yet? The lanky, black-haired man tiredly droned as he stared directly at Kaken, his eyes glowing. No way. Eraserhead is our homeroom teacher? I was hoping to test your situational awareness, but it would seem I can't even do that. With that, everyone who was in class sat down quietly, Izuku lamenting that he didn't even get to properly say hello to the nice girl, though he at least counted his blessings that he didn't have to deal with the intimidating glasses-wearing student as well. Kaken turned his head to glare daggers at Izuku every 20 seconds or so as the rest of the class filed in. Finally, it was time for class to begin proper. Aizawa-sensei informed them they wouldn't be going to orientation and had them change into their gym clothes and head out onto the field. Izuku did his best to avoid all forms of human contact while in the locker room, making sure there were 3 people between him and Kaken at any given time. When he was informed that the class would be undertaking a quirk assessment, Izuku got a bit worried, but remembered the training. Relax, you're in top physical condition from all that training you did on Dagoba Beach, he thought as everyone was fixated on Kaken launching the baseball into the horizon. A lot of your classmates have non-physical quirks, you won't embarrass yourself too much. You've got this. Probably. I want to go. That looks like fun, the pink girl exclaimed. Fun. Aizawa echoed back. All right then, how about this? Whoever comes last has no potential and will be expelled immediately. That sound fun to you? I really hope I got this. To his dismay, he found that every classmate of his managed to get stupidly high scores in something. Even the ones who didn't seem to have quirks that enhanced them physically. The short one with the odd purple hair found a way to use his quirk to cheese the sidestep test, and even the invisible girl absolutely aced the flexibility test. His nerve began to overwhelm him as the tests drew to their conclusion, and he definitely stood no chance at the ball test, not when the nice girl from the exam scored an infinity on that particular challenge. He was hoping, praying his mental calculations were incorrect when the final class ranking went up, hoping against hope that he was making things out to be worse than they were. 20 Midoriya Izuku. And just like that, his hopes and dreams seemed to fizzle out right there. Well, you heard me, Aizawa said. Midoriya, pack your bags. You're leaving. Izuku was shaking, stammering, trying to find some way of salvaging the situation. The girl with the black ponytail gasped. He was serious? He heard her whisper to herself in shock. And don't bother trying to use your quirklessness as an excuse, the teacher added. I'm holding you to the same standards as all my other students. And you've failed to meet them. Izuku just about had a heart attack. Not only was he being expelled, but he had just been outed as quirkless in front of the entire class. He didn't even bother to look at Kaken then, already having a clear picture of his venomous, smug, I told you so expression without even having to turn his head. His mind and body were on autopilot, turning around and trudging his way back to the locker room. His walk of shame took him past a tall, lanky, skeletal-looking blonde man he figured was just the janitor or something, who did little more than look at him sympathetically. I should have known it was too good to be true. As Midoriya rounded the corner and out of view, Aizawa felt a twinge of pity that he quickly suppressed. Don't let your emotions put lives in danger. His heart is without a doubt in the right place, but no matter how hard he tries, no matter how skilled he might be, he'll only be a liability on the field. He'll be going up against villains who are physically better than him, against odds that even heroes with the strongest of quirks would struggle with. It's only logical to let someone more well-equipped take his place. Better to crush his dreams now than to let harsh reality kick his face in later on down the line. Even if it means fudging Hagicure's score a little. After all, he was an underground hero, and people like him had to do questionable things to save lives. And that was exactly what he was doing today. Still, he hoped his conscience wouldn't continue to gnaw at him. He dismissed his class for the day, knowing he had drilled some respect into them. Bakugo would definitely be a problem child, but he had made heroes out of worse before. And besides, with the initial weeding out over with, he could get to work prepping Shinso to fill the vacancy. Ochako couldn't stop thinking about that boy. She wanted to stick up for him like she did after the exam, but something told her Aizawa wouldn't be as approachable as present Mike. It just seemed so unfair to her. He put his life on the line to save mine, and this is how he's rewarded. Still, she didn't say a word. Neither did Ishido, who was uncharacteristically quiet the entire walk back to the locker room. From what little Ochako had seen of her, the acid girl was a social butterfly, but she was silent. She's probably blaming herself, she thought. After all, it was her remark about the test being fun that made Aizawa give that ultimatum. Or maybe he would have done that anyway. Who knows? Stepping out the front door to the school, she was making small talk with Ida, the supposed stick-in-the-mud who was actually pretty nice once you got to know him, when they noticed the solitary figure trudging sadly towards the front gate. It's him, Ochako thought, speeding up to try to catch up to him, hoping to properly thank him for what he did, console him for what happened, but then her mind hit a bit of a roadblock. Crap, what was his name again? I only saw his name on the scoreboard for a split second. Wait, what did Bakugo call him again? Alright. Hey, Deku, wait up. The boy suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, Ochako feeling relieved that she'd gotten it right, only for Deku to suddenly break out into a run, darting away from the school at full speed. Ochako blinked in confusion, as did Ida. What happened? The bespectacled boy asked. I'm not sure. She replied. His surname was Midoriya, wasn't it? It was, I think. I wonder why he bolted like that. Later that evening, Ochako would do an online search for Deku Midoriya, hoping to find him on social media and maybe reach out to him that way. She didn't find him, but she did find out what Deku meant. She didn't get much sleep that night. A week later, Izuku wasn't even surprised as he and his mother went through the mail that morning. He wasn't even that disappointed. Not like he expected much to begin with. Upon hearing of her son's expulsion, Inko was furious at the school for allowing it to happen. She demanded he let her sue UA, but Izuku pointed out that A, the teachers at UA were well within their rights to expel whoever they wanted for whatever reason, and B, even if they weren't, UA's legal team were top-notch and would win regardless. So instead, she suggested they try to contact some of the other hero schools in the area. After his shining performance on the entrance exam, at least one of them was sure to let him attend. It was worth a shot, Izuku had said. But then the response letters arrived, and they all said roughly the same thing with different wording. They'd love to have him, but to make a transfer partway into the semester after having been expelled would be a bureaucratic nightmare, and their classes were full, so he should try again next year. Translation: we don't want a quirkless reject to take up space. Shiketsu turned him down. So did Ketsubutsu. And Seijin. And Ci. Inko was just about the end of her rope, and she was starting to become concerned that was close to being literal in Izuku's case. But then they got to Hamada's letter, which was significantly thicker than the others. Midoriya Izuku. Your message has been received, and we are pleased to inform you that your request for a transfer has been accepted. We would be honored to welcome you into our hero course. Enclosed within is the list of school supplies, required texts. Izuku was already tearing up by this point. Doors had been slammed in his face all his life, but fate had finally decided to leave a window open for him. It didn't matter that he only knew the Hamada Institute existed thanks to Googling all the hero schools within 200 kilometers of his apartment. He had another shot. I can still become a hero. As he prepared to enroll in Hamada, he slowly began to accept that maybe UA wouldn't have been the best for him after all. Kaken was still there, for one. He'd make a great hero, to be sure, but Izuku didn't think he wanted to have to sit behind him for 3 more years. Not to mention, the teachers and students were just as bad as the ones at Aldra. Aizawa had singled him out and humiliated him in front of the entire class, and the class had turned on him the second they found out he was quirkless. Even that nice girl had mocked him and called him by that dreaded nickname. So, in spite of his disappointment, he felt as though he had dodged a bullet. That feeling was only further cemented when word got out about the USJ incident. Hamada's walls were clean, sparsely decorated aside from the odd map, and much of the school was a silver-blue color. Occasionally there was a display case showcasing some piece of support gear designed by the institute. One in particular Izuku stopped to gush over was the Kaiju Aura stabilizer worn by the retired American pro hero Fredzilla. He and his mother dropped by the principal's office to fill out some paperwork to finalize a few details regarding his transfer. Inside the office were a number of pictures of who he assumed to be some of the school's alumni. Very few of them were pro heroes, but one of them caught his eye, the biggest picture of all of them. Hanging directly above the principal's chair was a large framed photo of the school's namesake alongside two other figures. On the left was a teenager, about Izuku's age actually, with square glasses, unruly black hair, and a blue hoodie. Even though the subject was younger than most knew him, Izuku recognized him immediately as Hamada Hiro, better known as the technopathic neuronic hero, Macro 6. On the right was a taller boy, looking about college age, who seemed to be related to Hiro but whom Izuku didn't recognize. And in the center was a person with some sort of pillow quirk? No, that looks artificial, it's a balloon or something. Actually, it was a robot, the principal said, clearly picking up on Izuku's struggle to decipher the picture. It's nice to finally meet you too. I'm Principal Ribaru Sutano. He was a kindly-looking old man with rectangular green-tinted glasses, a mustache, and thinning hair. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Ribaru, Inko said, bowing slightly. This won't take long, I promise you, just some paperwork you need to fill out while I ask the boy a few questions. And maybe answer a few of his as well. Inko smiled and nodded, sitting down to fill the papers out. Izuku sat down and cleared his throat. Sir? I'm really grateful you'd extend this invitation to me. We're glad to have you. You should know, before your message arrived, I was already thinking of contacting you. Really? Izuku asked. Oh yes. One of the faculty members at UA, who asked to remain anonymous, sent me a video recording of your entrance exam. And I must say, UA doesn't know what they're missing out on. He leaned back in his chair. I should let you know that we're aware of how quirkless are treated in most schools, and I'd like to inform you that our school has a strict policy on quirk discrimination of any kind. You'll be safe here. Izuku glanced up at him warily. That was what Aldra Junior High had said, but as it turns out, the rules mean nothing when the people who are supposed to enforce them just don't care. Ribaru smiled kindly. Looks like you need some convincing. Tell me, who is this school named after? This was easy. Hamada Hiro, Izuku said. The old man shook his head. Incorrect. Izuku looked surprised. Really? The principal turned his body and gestured to the big photograph. That's Hiro on the left. But the other boy in the picture is his older brother, Hamada Tadashi. He was a brilliant scientific mind, doing a lot of great work as hero support. He was the one who developed the microchip used in most modern medical robots. In fact, he was Hiro's inspiration to become a pro hero. Izuku never knew this side of Macro 6. So, why have I never heard of him? He was quirkless. Izuku gasped, and Inko's eyes widened a bit as she stopped writing. Ribaru chuckled again before a serious expression came across his face. He died in a lab accident the day of his brother's graduation. Hiro did his best to preserve his brother's memory, but even decades ago, the quirkless were on their way out as far as society was concerned, so nobody cared. He turned back to Izuku. When Hiro founded this school, people always associated the Hamada name with him, but he always intended it to be named for his brother. So it would go against everything our founder stood for if we were to turn you away for losing the genetic lottery. He looked the boy in the eyes as Izuku began to tear up again. We would be honored to have you attend the Hamada Institute. Uraraka blinked as the memory of that first day flooded back to her. She hadn't had a lot of time to dwell on it through her time at U, what with all the other insanity she had to deal with, but occasionally her mind wandered to that unassuming quirkless boy she had unwittingly scared off. What if she managed to befriend him? Where was he now? She had asked herself that every now and again, and now she knew the answer. From nearby, Ashido gasped in recognition, and a few of the other students remembered him as well. Uraraka turned this new information over in her head before coming to a very definite conclusion. I think we should pay him a visit. I'd like that, Ashido said, strangely quietly. Yeah, I'm all for it, Kirishima added. But there's just one problem. I have no idea what agency he works for. Yaoyorozu was already in the midst of an internet search. I can't find the information anywhere. It seems as though, even as a Daylight Pro hero, he keeps a lot of information secret and lives a remarkably private life. Uraraka said, thinking. Maybe Bakugo knows something. It seemed like they had a history together. I'll ask him, Kirishima suggested. He copied the link to the interview and texted it to Bakugo, asking if he knew anything that would help them track down the elusive sleeper hit, and then press send. A few moments later, everyone swore they felt a small earthquake followed by the distant sound of a scream of rage. Once it became apparent that Bakugo wouldn't be any help, the small group debated on what to do next. Maybe we should just drop it for now, Uraraka suggested. With him in the public eye, we'll probably find out more about him soon. Yeah, that makes sense, Ashido sighed. I'm not sure I understand, Yaoyorozu cut in. Why is it so important for you to find him? Uraraka again sighed. Even if he was only our classmate for one day, he was still our classmate. Not just that, Ashido added. I need to make it up to him for getting him expelled. I need to apologize too, Uraraka admitted. I could have been his friend, but all I did was drive him off. And I just want to tell him how manly he is for standing shoulder to shoulder with the best heroes around without a quirk. Kirishima said with his typical level of admiration. The former class representative and unofficial class mom seemed deep in thought, but gave a slight smile. Then I'll help as well. Perfect. Ashido cheered, having regained some of her trademark energy. Then I hereby declare us the Sleeper Hit Friendship Squad. Aizawa stepped into the principal's office with an unreadable expression. Nedzu already had some cups of tea laid out and the same unnerving smile he usually had, the morning light streaming in through the open windows. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Aizawa. Please, take a seat. The erasure hero sat down and eyed his cup for a bit before looking up at the rat that sat before him. This is about Sleeper Hit, isn't it? Perceptive as usual, Nedzu said casually before taking a sip of tea. Aizawa sighed heavily. I'll say it. That boy was the worst miscalculation of my entire career. I'd certainly say so, Nedzu bluntly replied, putting the cup down. Are you aware of what's happened since Sleeper Hit's interview? I can't say I am, Aizawa admitted. Really? Nedzu asked, actually sounding a little surprised. In the 2 days since the interview, there's been a bit of an uproar against UA. As it turns out, people aren't exactly happy with the idea that you can be arbitrarily kicked from the hero course even after having passed the exam. All from one student? Not quite. As it turns out, there are quite a few expulsions, 9 at my count, not counting our good friend Midoriya, with a similar story. Passed the entrance exam fair and square, expelled for not having a particularly useful quirk, accepted by another hero school. Not all of them were yours, but your track record is still quite impressive. And no one thought to call attention to this before now? Aizawa asked incredulously. Oh, of course they did. But UA's reputation as the highly prestigious school that trained all might and endeavor shielded it from those criticisms. Of course, none of the other would-be alumni had the same unique quirk status as Midoriya, or a place within the top, and those complaints are starting to gain quite a bit more attention. Nedzu got out of the chair and began pacing. So, as you can imagine, there's been a pretty huge demand for a reform of UA's system. As there always is, of course. You and I both know how prejudiced UA's curriculum is towards people with strong quirks, but the board of directors has made sure that system remains in place. Of course, now that we actually have a solid example of how badly our system can fail, we can't continue to keep going on as though nothing is wrong. Aizawa flinched. A part of him wanted to defend his actions, say that the exam scores weren't a measure of sustained effort, that it only exists to weed out the truly hopeless candidates, but he said nothing. Though part of the blame rests on me, I fear, Nedzu continued. Up until now, I have been mostly content to give teachers free rein to govern their classes how they see fit. I have up to this point trusted your judgment, But that approach won't work quite as well anymore. So there are going to be changes with UA going forward. And I wanted to let you know you won't be able to govern your class quite as freely starting next semester. That won't be necessary, Aizawa replied with a heavy sigh. I'm resigning my position. Really? Nedzu asked, legitimately surprised. I wasn't going to punish you too harshly. Your actions, while questionable, were still well within your rights as a UA teacher. I know that. But this most recent mistake of mine has had more severe consequences than just sabotaging UA's reputation. Nedzu raised an eyebrow. Go on. Sleeper Hit arrested 17 criminals in one fell swoop that day, he explained. And a lot of them had pretty strong quirks. He knows how to deal with crowds, and he knows how to work around quirks. He's not the analytic hero for nothing. How many times in that first semester did my class have to deal with a large number of villains? Quite a few times. But the USJ incident specifically, Aizawa continued. During that exercise, we were one student short. I know it's pointless to dwell on what could have been. But part of me knows that if I hadn't expelled Midoriya, if he had been there for that exercise, then maybe Azui and Mineta would still be alive. He stood up. So I cannot, in good conscience, remain here at UA. Nedzu looked upset, but nodded in understanding. I understand. And I accept your resignation. Aizawa bowed. Thank you, sir. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room. I feel like I owe UA something, you know? Uraraka said between slurps of ramen as Ishido nodded. But I can't ignore it either. The two were sitting in a ramen shop before their patrol. I get you, Ishido replied. I want to defend UA too. But when you think about it, we were the lucky ones. She took another slurp. You can lift 1,000,000 tons with only nausea to show for it. I can melt through walls, and Kirishima? Not only is he indestructible, but didn't his quirk, mutate right after the Kamino incident and give him, super-duper strength? It's so unfair it's not even funny. Kirishima might as well have 2 different quirks while Sleeper Hit doesn't get any. Well, look on the bright side, Ishido said. You can't say Sleeper Hit isn't doing well. Yeah, I guess that's true. Just then, both of their cell phones vibrated at the same time. Simultaneously, they checked them. Villain attack in progress in the Surasudo Industrial Park. All nearby heroes please respond ASAP. Surasudo. That's just 2 blocks away from here. Uraraka quickly shoved the remaining ramen into her mouth and the two quickly ran off, before realizing that they had to get into their hero costumes first. Thankfully they usually did have their costumes on hand for situations like this, but changing in a restaurant bathroom wasn't the most dignified thing in the world. Still, not 2 minutes later an alien queen was acid skating towards Surasudo at high speeds while Uravity flew through the air just behind her. 3 villains were grouped together as they walked through the abandoned power plant, looking round for the hero who was giving them so much trouble. When they first arrived they made the mistake of splitting up to cover more ground, but the heroes showed up much sooner than they were expecting, and one of their number had already been soundly knocked out. The tallest and largest villain had spikes all over his arms that seemed to be formed from his skin. He was wearing a bulletproof vest and camo pants, and his dark blue hair covered his eyes. The shortest one of the bunch, who seemed to be made entirely of red rocks, looked around with his beady little eyes as he stomped alongside his skin-spike comrade. The third, a lankier man with a visor and a black hoodie, kept his cool as he took the lead. "Look alive, men," he said confidently. "He might have got the drop on us, but he doesn't have the element of surprise anymore." "He's just quirkless, isn't he?" the spiked one asked, cracking his knuckles. "Let's not be too hasty, Horned Toad," the visor one said. "Just because we have the advantage doesn't mean we automatically win. You saw what he did to Chameleon." The 3 of them were standing in a courtyard of sorts, an open area surrounded on all sides by bigger metal structures and generators. They had broken into the plant to steal parts to sell on the black market, but just after arriving, Sleeper Hit got the drop on them and took Chameleon down almost immediately. Just then they heard a noise around the corner. "Hila, go check it out," the leader ordered. Hila, the short rocky one, said nothing as he rounded the corner to check. Just as he walked out of sight, The leader spasmed as a jolt of electricity flew through him. Horned Toad turned around and saw that he had been hit by the cable of a stun gun fired by Sleeper Hit, who was already in the process of charging towards Horned Toad. The spiky villain blocked with his arm, and while the spikes didn't damage Sleeper thanks to the metal gauntlets he was wearing, it also blocked the incoming punch. Sleeper went for a low kick to knock Horned Toad off balance, but as Horned Toad tripped he quickly rolled backwards and got to his feet, before charging at Sleeper. The green-haired hero dodged out of the way, using the momentum to spin around and launch another gauntlet-clad punch at the villain's head, who again blocked it with one of his arms. At least the gauntlets are doing their job so the spikes aren't hurting me, the hero thought as the exchange of blows continued, neither combatant gaining on the other as the visor-wearing leader was still unconscious and Gila hadn't returned. "Your armor won't save you forever," Horned Toad taunted as he swung his arm again. "These spikes are tough, and if they do break, they regrow almost instantly." "I know, I figured out your quirks before I got here," Sleeper thought. "If I can just move the fight indoors, then I can use the—" Surprise! Sleeper whipped around as the rocky form of Gila was barreling towards him. He just barely managed to get out of the way before being crushed. He thought that Gila would crash into Horned Toad, but to his shock, Horned Toad's quirk also seemed to enhance his strength as he caught Gila, rolling with the impact like one would when catching a baseball, and flung him right back around at Sleeper. Thankfully his aim was off, but Sleeper was still doing mental calculations at a rapid pace. "Okay, Horned Toad has super strength. Good to know. I can defend against Horned Toad just fine, but I need Gila out of the equation. I only have so many grenades, my taser won't work against him. And I need to take them down before Basilisk recovers. Gila's super durable and strong, but he's made of rocks. No wait, his entire body isn't rocks. I can see organic bits like his eyes and mouth. But his arms don't seem to bleed or bruise or have fingernails, and his arms aren't proportional to one another. Of course, his limbs are pure rock, but on the rest of his body it's just a layer of rock around his flesh. And I thought that Gila's composition looked different in the older photos I've seen, but his rocky body is the same color as the soil in the nearby park, which means that the rock erodes and chips off like a human loses skin cells. That means I can incapacitate him without permanently injuring him if I break off his arms. If I can get in close, I can identify natural cleavage planes and strike there." Sleeper grabbed a grappling hook from his belt and fired it at Horned Toad, the cable wrapping around Horned Toad's legs. With the spiked villain temporarily restrained, Sleeper turned away and charged at Gila, who gestured in a come-at-me manner. Sleeper gritted his teeth, knowing he was going to be taking one good solid hit to the face before the day was done. Thankfully, due to Gila's arms being made of rocks, they were a bit slower, so Sleeper was easily able to block his hits as he examined his arms for any hint of a weak spot. Finally he found it, a small, subtle line between two slightly different shades of red. He rolled out of the way as Gila went in for a power hit, before stopping next to a transformer. He quickly ripped a sheet of metal off the transformer and jumped into the air, aiming it precisely enough to slice down onto the line, cleanly slicing through the rock. It was just as he suspected, the arm was completely made of rock. Though he didn't envy the amount of pain Gila was in if the gravelly wailing was any indication. Regenerative or not, losing an arm had to hurt. Doubled over in pain, Gila wouldn't be participating in the fight anytime soon. "That's two down." He turned his attention back towards the other villains, but gasped as he saw that not only had Horned Toad recovered, but the visored villain, Basilisk, had also gotten to his feet, and was in the process of removing his visor. Time for a tactical retreat. Taking one of his remaining smoke bombs, only 3 left, he created a smoke screen, masking his escape. He ran to a nearby tower and scrambled up the scaffolding, grateful that his metal gauntlets and boots were also well insulated. Hiding out of view, he caught his breath. He began to formulate a strategy when his earpiece began to make a noise. "Sleeper hit? This is Pro Hero Uravity. Me and Alien Queen are en route to your position." He blinked, then shook his head rapidly. Now wasn't the time for him to bring his personal issues to work, they had villains to defeat. "I read you, Uravity," Sleeper Hit said quietly. "Alien Queen, you there too?" "Yeah, I'm here." Two of the villains are down, two remaining. One of them, Horned Toad, has a quirk that allows him to form super strong spikes out of his skin, as well as giving him strength enhancement. The other, Basilisk, can create a layer of thin rock around you if he stares at you long enough. Alien Queen, your acid, even on its lowest potency, should be able to severely weaken the spikes, and I think a higher intensity should melt through the stone covering if any of us gets hit by Basilisk's stone vision. Uravity, one of the downed villains, has a quirk that makes him partially made of rock. He's incredibly heavy, but if he were to lose gravity, he'd make an effective projectile. The smoke below him began to clear, Horned Toad and Basilisk both looking around furiously for him. It was only a matter of time before he was spotted. Horned Toad should be the first target. Basilisk is physically weaker, but we can't get to him until Horned Toad is dealt with. There he is. Horned Toad shouted from below, beginning to pound on the structure on which Sleeper was hiding. It began to shake. Sleeper Hit grunted in frustration. They found me. We've just arrived, we'll be joining you shortly. Gotcha. The tower shook again and he wasn't sure it would hold out much longer. Pulling out the spare grappling hook he had and thanking his lucky stars he had the foresight to carry multiples of them, he fired it onto another structure across the complex, and when the cable had hit its mark, he swung down towards the two villains, trying to angle himself for a massive kick towards Horned Toad. He hoped the momentum would allow his kick to break through Horned Toad's guard, but once the kick connected with the spikes and did nothing, he swore under his breath. The impact dislodged the grapple gun from his hand as Horned Toad swung the arm around and flung him into the air. As he tried to angle himself for a slightly less painful landing, he suddenly felt himself hitting something soft and pink. He also noticed he had stopped falling, and that was when he realized who had caught him. I got you, Uravity said. Sleeper Hit nodded. Right. And Alien Queen is on the ground. Uravity nodded. Right, let's get back down to ground level. The two of them descended, Urarika using jets of air to redirect herself like astronauts did, and they landed near Alien Queen, who left a trail of acid behind her from her entry. The three of them assumed a battle stance as the two villains did the same. They stared each other down before Alien Queen suddenly launched a spray of acid towards Horned Toad. As usual, he used his big, beefy, armored arms to guard against it. As soon as the acid was on its trajectory, Sleeper Hit darted forward and punched with his gauntlet. Horned Toad smirked until the punch struck his arm unimpeded and sent him reeling backwards. When the acid began to work on the spikes, Horned Toad didn't feel it. In much the same way that hair on the outside of the body doesn't have any nerves, and don't feel pain unless the parts inside the skin are pulled, he didn't feel any pain from his spikes, and didn't realize what happened until he felt the cold steel of Izuku's gauntlet combined with the tingling on the rest of his arm. Basilisk's eyes widened under his visor before noticing Uravity running towards where Hila was lying unconscious, and took off his visor and glared. Uravity was about to touch Hila to make him weightless, but suddenly her feet stopped moving. Then her legs. She looked down and saw rock begin to creep up her body. She struggled to free herself, but it was pointless. I'm having a bit of a situation over here. Sleeper Hit heard her voice in his earpiece and struck Horned Toad with a powerful punch to knock him away so he could look back. Alien Queen, use the acid to dissolve that rock. Though wait until it completely covers her, wouldn't want to accidentally give her a full face of acid. The acid hero nodded and skated towards Uravity, who had heard Sleeper's instructions over her earpiece, reminding herself that he knew what he was doing. She caught a glimpse of Alien Queen rushing towards her before she was covered completely. Meanwhile, Sleeper Hit readied his stun gun again. It was running low on power, and he had hoped to recharge it, but the villains hadn't given him any room to breathe. He did, however, have a little bit left. So when Horned Toad ran towards him again, he took the shot. Without the spikes to intercept it, the electricity shot through Horned Toad and sent him to the ground, allowing Sleeper Hit to turn his attention to Basilisk, who was so fixated on petrifying Uravity that he didn't notice until the last second that he was about to be decked in the face with a metal gauntlet. His expression only lasted a split second before the ironclad punch sent him to the pavement, but it made this whole incident worth it in his opinion. Horned Toad, it turned out, was much better at recovering than Basilisk was, and immediately got back onto his feet and readied his fist to clean Sleeper Hit's clock. The hero was about to dodge before he heard Uravity's voice behind him. "Duck." Sleeper Hit did as he was told, and dropped just as the still unconscious body of Gila flew over him like a cannonball, slamming directly into Horned Toad's chest, launching him backwards into a wall, where they impacted with a loud crash. And release. Both villains immediately fell out of the crater they made in the wall and dropped to the ground. Sleeper Hit took off his faceplate, letting it hang around his neck so he could catch his breath a bit better. He pulled out his phone and dialed the police to let them know they could come in and make the arrest. As he did so, Uraraka and Ishido looked at each other and nodded, before walking towards him. As Midoriya hung up the call, he turned to the two girls with a raised eyebrow. Uraraka began. "It's nice to see you again, Midoriya." Midoriya's reaction was unreadable as he looked between the two. "I remember you. I don't think I ever got your names, though." "Oh, Uraraka Ochako. I'm Ishido Mina." "Alright. I'm Midoriya Izuku." "Izuku, so that's his name." "Izuku, I owe you an apology." Uraraka decided to cut to the chase. "I'm really sorry about calling you that nickname. I didn't know it was an insult. I heard Bakugo call you that and I dunno, I thought it sounded cute." Before Midoriya could respond, Ishido spoke up. "And I'm sorry for getting you expelled. I just opened my big mouth and dash." Midoriya cut her off with a raised hand. "I know. You don't have to say anything." Uraraka smiled a bit, looking hopeful. "That was easier than I thought it would be. I get it. You saw me on TV the other day, remembered me from the first day, and now you want to be friends with me now that I'm no longer a quirkless, useless Deku." Uraraka's face fell. Does he really think we're only apologizing because he's a hero now? And no, we wanted to apologize for a while now but we couldn't find you. He said skeptically. It sounded like the venom he had suppressed was creeping back into his voice. "I'm willing to bet you completely forgot about me the next day and only remembered when I ranked above you." "How can you even think that?" Uraraka replied, sounding hurt. "You saved my life." Looking back, it's a miracle he stayed so professional during the fight. "And then you called me useless." "I just told you I didn't dash." They were interrupted when the police showed up. They immediately began swarming in with paramedics, rousing the villains awake after slapping them in quirk-suppressant HNDCFFS. "Well," Midoriya said, reapplying the faceplate, "I need to head back to the agency and file my report." He turned to leave, but a couple steps later, he stopped and turned. "Oh, and Ishido?" "Why yeah." Ishido replied nervously. "I don't blame you for getting me expelled. They would have found an excuse regardless." And with that, he took his leave, brushing past a couple officers in the process. Uraraka just stared at the ground in shock. He really thinks I hated him? Did that nickname really affect him that much? Ishido, however, simply watched him as he disappeared around the corner. "I gotta say, I keep hearing people calling him plain-looking, but now that I've seen his face, I couldn't disagree more." She was met with silence. "Uraraka?" She turned and saw her friend bending down to pick something up. "He left behind both of his grappling guns," she said, turning to show Ishido the damaged piece of tech. "You think we should return these?" Ishido shrugged. "He'll probably just replace them anyhow. And wouldn't he just think you were sking up to him?" Uraraka tossed the grappling gun up and down in her hand. "Yeah, I guess that's true. There's got to be some way we can." She stopped, holding the gadget up closer to her face. "Wait a minute. What's up?" Ishido asked, moving in to see what got Uraraka's attention. Uraraka turned the gun around and showed Ishido what she saw. The back end of it has the logo for Hatsum Industries on it. Ishido took the gun and looked for herself. Sure enough, there it was, a pair of goggles shaped and stylized to resemble the Ramaji letter H. "Yep. That's her all right." "I thought he hated you." "I do too. And even a lot of the other UA graduates a little freaked out by her." "So why would Midoriya go to her of all people for support gear? Especially considering Hamada's more well-known for its support department than its hero." "Course." Uraraka faced Ishido with a determined look on her face. Guess we're going to find out. Shinso stared at the link that was sent to him with indecision. The night of the hero ranking, Kirishima sent him this link. At the time, Shinso rolled his eyes and reiterated he couldn't care less about the rankings. Kirishima immediately texted back and said no, it has almost nothing to do with the rankings and that he needed to see it. So he clicked the link, saw it was an interview, and immediately closed it because he didn't care what sort of gossip the class was going on about this time. But over the past couple days he'd been hearing a lot more discussion about quirk discrimination, which wasn't something people generally liked to talk about, which was his first indication something was up. Then he heard a remark about how quirkist the hero course of UA was. This did not sit well with him at all. Aizawa was willing to give him a shot at being a hero in spite of his villainous quirk, and the other students had been pretty accepting. On average, anyway, but Kogo thought he was creepy. It was impossible to gauge how Todoroki was feeling, and Ojiro still hadn't quite forgiven him for the sports festival. But he wouldn't call them quirkist. It then dawned on him that this all began the day after the hero rankings, and he began to toy with the idea that he really should check out that interview after all. Eventually he shrugged and clicked play. And he watched. I was expelled the first day because I didn't have a quirk that would help me throw a baseball. He stared in disbelief. He shot a text to Kirishima with his first suspicion. I finally watched the interview. Was that kid supposed to be in our class? Shinso digested the words before his eyebrows formed into a glare. Not at anything in particular, he just glared. He soon had to push that thought to the back of his mind, started to suit up, putting his capture weapon on and covering it with his incognito jacket. He couldn't dwell on it during his patrol. He couldn't let himself be distracted. He was sure of one thing though. Next time he saw Aizawa, they were going to have some words. The girls reconvened at the mansion, the unofficial base of operations for the Sleeper Hit Friendship Squad, and told Kirishima and Yaoyorozu what happened. About the fight, about Sleeper Hit, about their argument, and about finding one of Hatsume's gadgets. It does make sense, Yaoyorozu said. As a quirkless hero, Midoriya would be heavily reliant on support gear, which Hatsume would be more than eager to provide. So we go over to her lab and ask her about it? Ashido asked. Because I'd rather not, if it's all the same to you. My ears are still ringing from the last time I went over there. I'll go, Kirishima volunteered. My quirk means I'll be the least likely to get hurt if anything explodes. Even after graduating, Hatsume has always maintained that catastrophic malfunctions are a mere stepping stone to scientific breakthroughs. You sure? Uraraka asked. I'll be fine, Kirishima responded with a toothy grin. Don't worry. With that he stepped out. Just then, the rich girl turned and saw Uraraka with a downtrodden expression. Uraraka? She asked softly. Is something wrong? Uraraka turned to her. Oh, it's nothing. Don't worry. Is it about how Midori yelled at you? Ashido asked. Yeah, it's just that. Wait, Midori? Uraraka asked as she did a double take at the cutesy nickname. Whatever. It's just, the more I think about it, the more I'm worried. He might have been right. About what? That I'm only trying to reconnect with him to clear my own conscience. The other two girls looked at each other before Ashido spoke up. Ochako, you didn't actually forget about him, did you? Of course I didn't, Uraraka said, flustered. He saved my life at the exam. But I couldn't find him after She rubbed the back of her head. Made him think I hated him. He didn't have any social media or anything that I could find. That makes a distressing amount of sense, Yaoyorozu said. As someone without a quirk, he likely got bullied enough physically that he didn't want to open himself up to cyberbullying. That's awful, Ashido whispered. She had been bullied in junior high for her appearance, and while she would later come to accept her outlandish looks, which inspired her hero moniker Alien Queen, Midnight's opinions be d*med, she wouldn't wish it on anyone. It was then that she had a thought. Do you think he made friends at Hamada? Hard to say, Yaoyorozu replied. I did some research and evidently they take their anti-discrimination very seriously. So he likely wouldn't have been bullied. But at Uraraka realized, he was bullied, or thought he was anyway, in what was supposed to be a safe place, by people he let his guard down around. She gasped. Oh no. Midoriya might have closed himself off and refused to make friends, and it's all my fault. Ashido picked up on the tears forming in her friend's eyes. Ochako, I really hope I'm wrong, Uraraka whispered. But if I'm right and he never made any friends, then we'll just have to fix that, she finished with a look of determination in her eyes. Ashido grinned. That's the spirit. Hatsum Industries wasn't a particularly tall or luxurious building by any means. In fact, one might go so far as to call it an eyesore, covered in reinforced metal plating that clearly didn't all come from the same source. Kirishima walked through the front doors and was immediately bombarded by the sounds of machinery, power tools, electrical currents crackling through wires, computers beeping. Luckily, working with Bakugo a lot meant that he employed ear protection on his costume. Taking the elevator, he descended to the lower basement level, where he knew Hatsum would be working. And working there she was, welding some metal together for what looked like some kind of gauntlet. She looked up as she noticed the new arrival and smiled. Hey, Mr. Bulletproof. What brings you here? She asked. Kirishima chuckled at the nickname, recalling the memory of the incident that gave him the name before he got a serious look on his face. I just wanted to ask you a question, he said. Are you in the middle of something? Nah, Hatsum replied, rummaging through a drawer for some wire. Just killing time until my boyfriend gets off work. I need him to watch the workshop while I go pick something up. She's got a boyfriend? Kirishima thought before getting back to the task at hand. I was wondering, you made some gadgets for Sleeper Hit, right? But I thought he hates you, eh? Oh, he does, Hatsum replies nonchalantly. Not me though. It's an interesting story, actually. You see, oh, I'm sorry, she said, looking a little flustered. You probably don't want to hear the full story. I've been trying to pick up on social cues. I've been told I have problems with that dash. No, actually, do tell me, I'm really curious, Kirishima said. Oh, really? Hatsum asked, looking pleasantly surprised. Well, pull up a chair then. We met during our second-year internships. You remember my little display at our second sports festival, right? I do. And I think you still owe the school for those bleachers you atomized. I'll pay them back eventually. Anyway, that caught the attention of the slice and dice hero, Wasabi, and I got an offer from him. Well, I got a bunch of offers, but I just kinda picked one at random and figured, why not? I don't actually get a lot of internship offers from hero agencies. Usually it's just support companies. So I went up to his agency in Akudo. Have you ever given field support to heroes in combat? Wasabi asked as he ushered Hatsum into his agency's lobby. Wasabi was a tall, dark-skinned man built like a brick made out of smaller bricks, his hair tied back into a bun. His costume was green-colored armor, the front of which was styled to resemble a chef's apron. No, I haven't, but I've been dying to try my babies out in real combat, instead of in a lab or on another student. Well then, you'll get your chance, he said as the elevator dinged and an unassuming-looking teenager with green hair and a freckled face stepped out. You'll be working with my other intern, Midoriya Izuku, hero name, Sleeper Hit. Midoriya, I'd like you to meet Hatsum Mei. She's a support student from UA. If he noticed Izuku's expression sour, he didn't comment on it as he continued. I know you're required to take support classes at Hamada, but at the end of the day, it doesn't even compare to a fully fledged support student. So I'm having her work on your gear, and when we go out on patrol next, she'll be out on the field with us, observing your gear in action, and providing more support if need be. That's fine, Midoriya said. I have some business to take care of, Wasabi said as he turned to leave. You two get acquainted. The support workshop is at the far end of the hall. As he exited, Hatsum walked up to her fellow intern. Nice to meet Broccoli boy, she greeted, getting uncomfortably close to the greenette. Chai, he nervously stammered out, so startled by the close proximity that the weird nickname didn't even register. Hatsum, right? That's right. And you're gonna help me show off my super cute babies. Your super what? He asked, confused. Oh, you mean your gadgets. That's right. And you're gonna take my babies with you no matter what. Izuku didn't quite know what to say, but soon collected his thoughts. I guess. That's for the best. I could really use some more firepower in the field. He sat down in one of the comfy chairs in the lobby. I interned with Wasabi because his quirk, psychic knives, basically does little more than give him an infinite supply of weapons. It doesn't actually help him use them, so he'd know a thing or two about using weapons. What about you? He asked. You're from the oh-so-prestigious UA. I bet you were just drowning in internship offers. What made you pick this agency? I kinda just picked one at random. So if your fighting style is focused around using weapons, Hatsum pressed. Your quirk must be something really low-key, right? She definitely didn't notice or care as Izuku averted his eyes and huffed. What is your quirk, anyway? I need to know so I can create my babies around it. Midoriya gritted his teeth. May as well get it over with. I'm quirkless. For the first time in a good long while, Hatsum was speechless. Quirkless? Like, you don't have a quirk? At all. That's what I said. Izuku looked away again, bracing for the elitism, the superior attitude that UA students were wont to. That's incredible. Izuku blinked. I'm sorry. One thing I learned right off the bat is that it's really annoying to design gear around someone's quirk. Their bodies work differently and I have to take their weaknesses into account. But you. She stood up and gestured excitedly. You're like the baseline for the entire human race. Thanks. I guess. Oh, Izuku, you and I are gonna be friends, she said, grinning. I can design my babies specifically for you and adapt them to whatever hero needs them. All right, Izuku said, sweating. Well, at least she doesn't think I'm useless. Just think of it, Hatsum Industries, the support company that powers the first quirkless pro hero. She took Izuku by the hand and dragged him off. Now let's get to work on your gear, so I can introduce you to some of my newest babies. Izuku soon found himself in a workshop, standing still as Hatsum began making adjustments to his all-purpose utility gauntlets, designed by the one and only Hatsum Mei, as he was wearing them. Almost got it, she said as she tightened a few bolts. Trust me, after you see my babies in combat, you won't want to go a full day without them. If you say so, he sighed. Say, broccoli boy, I was wondering who made your gear before now? I did. Oh, Hatsum asked. But Hamada's full of support students. Why not ask one of them to help? I'm sure one of them would be more than eager to take the load off your shoulders. I'd feel much better if I did my own work, he said. And I doubt they'd want to help a quirkless Deku like myself. Deku? She repeated. Oh, like the Deku scrubs from The Legend of Zelda. You do kinda look like one of them. I know just what they'd say, Izuku sighed. I'd love to. Really, I would, but I feel like my efforts would be better spent on a hero who isn't a lost cause. Sorry. I know Hamada is meant to be accommodating towards students without a quirk, but the other students are probably just as biased as the ones at UA. This made Hatsum pause. What's wrong with UA? She asked. It's one of Japan's best schools. I should know. If they let bullies like Bakugu in, Izuku replied, then it can't be that great. Oh, you know Explodey Hands? She asked before shaking her head. Why do you think the rest of UA is like that? Izuku sighed. He told her about passing the exam, how the first day ended. In his expulsion, how the nice girl he saved turned on him. The UA just isn't cut out for people like me, Izuku finished. Hatsum had set her tools down and was listening intently. The students look down on me, the faculty think I'm wasting space, and even you only see me as a walking advertisement for your babies. Do you really think that? Hatsum said, shockingly quiet. Izuku's expression softened. Hatsum. Izuku. I like to think I've got an eye for talent. Literally. My quirk lets me zoom in on things from kilometers away. Just by looking at you, I can tell you're gonna go places, with or without my help. And after hearing your story, I've decided I'm gonna be the one to help you get there, whether you like it or not. Izuku was speechless. He began to tear up a bit, old habits dying hard and whatnot. Hatsum, it just so happens that this is also good from a business standpoint, so that's a plus. Now hold still so I can adjust your other gauntlet. After that he had me do all his support gear. Of course this was on top of my other schoolwork, but nothing that the great Hatsum couldn't handle, she said proudly. Kirishima didn't know what to say. But amidst all his questions, one thing floated to the top of all his thoughts. If they let bullies like Bakugu in, then it can't be that great. Did he ever say how he knew Bakugu? Yeah, actually. He said they used to be childhood friends, Hatsum replied. Used to be? Well, what happened? Kirishima asked. He got his quirk and I didn't, a voice from behind him answered. Kirishima whirled around to find himself staring into the green eyes of Midoriya Izuku. Hey, broccoli boy. Hatsum called. How'd your patrol go? Kirishima got out of the way as Izuku stepped forward to meet her, a smile overtaking his face. It was really eventful. We finally caught the lizard gang. Uravity and Alien Queen showed up to help. Did you play nice with the other heroes for once? Hatsum asked playfully, getting into Izuku's personal space. Izuku didn't back down, instead seeming quite comfortable with the display. I mean, I tried, Izuku replied. Hatsum giggled. That's all I ask, she said before leaning in and giving Izuku a kiss on the cheek. Kirishima was legitimately surprised that Hatsum's boyfriend was sleeper hit of all people, and more than that, he was impressed that Midoriya stuck with her in spite of all her various eccentricities. So manly, he said to himself. Hey, Izuku, since you're off duty now, I gotta go pick up some parts that I ordered, so can you keep an eye on the lab and make sure nothing catches fire while I'm up? Sure thing, but I can't stay too long. I told Mom that I'd join her for dinner. Don't worry, I remember. She smiled, then turned to Kirishima. Sorry to leave before the story got to the really action-y part, but the place closes in 15 minutes. Gotta run. She made a mad dash for the elevator, leaving Kirishima alone with Izuku. So, sleeper hit. Kirishima began. I just wanted to say that what Aizawa did that first day was just super unmanly. Oh sure, you say that now, Izuku said, now that I proved him wrong. Kirishima sighed, remembering what Uraraka told him. Of course, unlike Uraraka, he never had any real interaction with him outside that fateful test. I guess I can't really argue, he admitted, scratching the back of his neck. What are you doing here? Izuku asked. Did Uravity put you up to this? Yeah, he admitted. She really wants to make it up to you, you know. She never meant to insult you. Please, Izuku rolled his eyes. You honestly expect me to believe that she'd see nothing wrong with calling me useless? Maybe it just didn't occur to her, Kirishima suggested. Maybe she thought it was short for Dikairu. Or maybe she thought it was because your hair makes you look kinda like a Deku scrub from Zelda. Izuku folded his arms. She heard it from Bakugu, and she saw how he acted. There's no way she thought it was just some cute nickname. Kirishima was reminded of what Hatsum told him. He said, Midoriya, did Bakugu bully you? Midoriya was about to respond before he paused. What's it to you anyway? Why do you care? Because sticking your nose into other people's business is what being a hero is all about. Even if he did, what makes you think I'd tell you? If you don't, I'll just ask Hatsum what she knows. And I'm guessing she's not as good at keeping secrets. The two faced each other silently for a good long while before Izuku relented. Yeah, he bullied me. Every day since we turned 4. Kirishima was shocked. Just because you didn't have a quirk? He thought that since I was trying to become a hero despite my handicap, I was looking down on him, thinking I was better than him. He was so used to being top dog that he couldn't stand the idea of anyone being above him. He'd use his quirk on me, he'd destroy my notebooks, he made sure none of the other kids wanted to be around me. He couldn't go a single day without harassing me. He used his quirk on you? Like at school? Didn't any adults do anything? Oh, they'd do something all right. They'd chastise me for being clumsy. Or they'd just give Bakugu and his friends a stern talking to and leave it at that. And what do you think they did to blow off steam? He chuckled bitterly. The teachers didn't want to jeopardize the career of a kid who was born to be a hero. So they just looked the other way. Kirishima looked horrified. Bro, but you didn't tell anyone even when you became a pro? When you knew people would believe you? I wanted to. I really did. Even back then, I so desperately wanted to tell someone. But then, right as I got the courage to speak out, Kamino happened. Kirishima paled. That was when. Izuku nodded. Bakugo was kidnapped by villains. All Might saved him from All for One, but sacrificed his life in the process. As much as I want Bakugo to be punished, I can't undermine All Might's last act of heroism by revealing that the boy he saved abused a quirkless kid for most of his life. I just can't do that to the #1 hero. Kirishima gritted his teeth. Bubro, I can't believe it. All this time, I thought you were so manly. I tried to be your friend, but this whole time, no wonder that nickname affected you so much. I was bullied in junior high too, Kirishima said. Me and Ishido. Alien Queen? Yeah. We both hated bullies, and we both swore to become heroes to fight them. And to think, Bakugo, my classmate, my friend, was one of them. The two of them were silent for a good long while. Thank you for believing me, Izuku said. It's what a real hero would do, Kirishima replied. I'd better get going now. Are you sure you don't want to tell someone what happened to you? Izuku nodded. I'm sure. I hate Bakugo, but I just like All Might too much. Right. Kirishima turned towards the elevator, but hesitated. For what it's worth, I think it's really manly that you became a hero without a quirk. For the first time since the two were left alone, Izuku smiled. It's worth more than you know. The elevator dinged. Kirishima stepped inside and waved goodbye, before being taken back up to the first floor. I guess there's some hope for UA's students after all, Izuku thought. Crap, I forgot to ask him about All Might's quirk. I had so many questions. I'm only going to say this one more time, lady, the mugger said menacingly, his knife brandished, his quirk causing steam to blow from his mouth as he spoke. Hand over whatever you got and we can both walk away. Look, I swear, I don't have anything, the terrified woman said, her voice lost in the echoes of the alleyway they were in. Wrong answer, lady. Hey, what's going on over here? A voice from behind asked. Why don't you mind your own? Hey. Let the woman go and turn yourself in to the police. The mugger robotically dropped the knife to the ground and walked out of the alley. Shinso, known in the underground as the persuasive hero, Blackout, checked to make sure the woman was all right, then phoned the police department that there was someone on his way over. With that, he left the alleyway, and was about to continue on his normal patrol route when a familiar presence approached. I saw someone walk out of the alley towards the police station. I assume that was your handiwork. Shinso turned and there was Aizawa, in all his scruffy glory. The persuasive hero frowned as he met the eyes of his mentor, the man he was currently feeling quite conflicted about. Even more so since he rewatched the interview and realized there was something that didn't quite sit right with him. It was, Shinso replied. Mind if I joined you on your patrol for a bit? I needed to talk with you about something. Aizawa nodded, and Shinso got the feeling his former homeroom teacher knew exactly what was eating him already. The two walked down the dimly lit road, not standing out much alongside the odd drunkard. So I saw that interview the other night, Shinso said, not wanting to beat around the bush. When you said that there was a vacancy in the hero course that first day, that was him, wasn't it? It was, Aizawa admitted. Not that it mattered much after ye. Sleeper Hit was in the same boat as me, Shinso continued. Told all his life that he couldn't be a hero. For different reasons, admittedly, but still. I saw him as a liability, Aizawa said. I know now I was wrong, benefit of hindsight and all, but in my defense, he did get the lowest score on the assessment test. I told them the consequences for failure. Out of the initial 20, he had the least potential in my eyes. That's a lie and you know it. Aizawa whipped around so fast Shinso thought he might have got whiplash. Later on in the interview, Shinso said, he explained just what kind of training he did. Over the course of 9 months, he single-handedly cleaned Dagoba Beach. And according to the people who saw him do it, he didn't have any equipment. There were rusted cars on that beach, Aizawa. Rusted cars. You have to be in peak physical condition to move one of those even a little. So tell me how he managed to get a lower score on the fitness test than Hagakure, who's a good gymnast but otherwise physically average. Aizawa avoided Shinsu's piercing gaze, unable to find an answer. You wanted me in the hero course, so you had to get rid of someone to make space. And you wanted to keep the girl with the stealth-based quirk. So you cheated. Aizawa sighed and looked down at the sidewalk. I won't deny it. But Shinso, all I wanted to do was give you a chance. And in doing so, you ripped that chance away from someone who deserved it just as much, Shinso pressed. You didn't even move him to Gen Ed, you just kicked him straight out. In that same interview he said that an anonymous UA faculty member put in a good word for him at Hamada. If it hadn't been for them, you might have taken away his future. Aizawa slowed to a stop, prompting Shinso to stop and turn his face to look at him, curiously. Aizawa? You said it yourself, he didn't have zero potential. I recognized that even then. I made an executive decision and expelled him, but I wasn't going to leave someone with potential completely to his own devices. So that night, I tracked down a video recording of his performance during the entrance exam and sent it to the principal of Hamada. Shinso whipped around to face him completely. It was you. I figured that Hamada would be a more suitable learning environment for him, he explained. That's why I fully expelled him instead of moving him to Gen Ed. That oh, I see, Shinso drawled accusingly as the two continued their walk. You admit he had potential. Just not enough for UA. Not enough for you. In case you've forgotten, UA isn't some community college that'll accept just anyone. I had the right to be selective of who got to stay, Aizawa defended, though even he didn't know why he bothered. He already knew full well he'd made a grave mistake. He did pass the entrance exam for the hero course, did he not? Shinso continued. Even I didn't manage that. If I'd passed the exam, and there was another Gen Ed student with a quirk you thought was more useful than mine, would you have expelled me too? Aizawa, once again, fell silent, not sure exactly what to say. There was a lot he wanted to say. He wanted to say that of course he wouldn't. But deep down, he knew that if he hadn't known Shinso before he enrolled, if Shinso had been just another UA student to him, he might have kicked him down to Gen Ed at the very least. That I don't know. The two of them arrived at a four-way intersection as the light began to change. Look, Shinso, I'm truly sorry. That I don't think I'm the one you should be apologizing to, Shinso said, not even turning his head as he crossed the street, leaving Aizawa alone on that corner. The Kamino incident had only just concluded. With the events still fresh in his mind and permanently seared there, Kirishima waited outside the hospital room as he braced himself for what was inside. Not too long ago, Bakugo was kidnapped by the League of Villains. So Kirishima and a few other students had gone to rescue him against Aizawa's wishes, and while they were more or less successful, it ended in a destructive battle between All Might and the incredibly powerful villain and All Might's evident nemesis, All for One. All Might had been victorious and All for One had been taken into custody, but All Might's wounds were fatal. And just a little while ago, All Might had requested him personally. Taking a deep breath, Kirishima opened the door and was greeted for a sight that, even though he knew exactly what to expect, he wasn't prepared for. In the bed, hooked up to N4, was All Might. But it wasn't the smiling beacon of strength and manliness the world knew. This was a skeletal shell of a man, pale, taking long, shallow breaths. His body was more bandaged than flesh at this point, especially his side. He turned his head slowly to face the new arrival and smiled sadly. Young Kirishima, you made it. Kirishima walked quickly to his side. All Might? You wanted to see me? I know that what you did went against every rule in the book. But you put everything on the line to rescue your friend, at the risk of expulsion, at the risk of death. You have the heart of a true hero. He coughed, Kirishima looking on in concern. Young Kirishima, my quirk has been a mystery ever since I first made my debut. It's a special quirk called One for All. For all. The words rolled off Kirishima's tongue. It's a power stockpiling quirk, passed down from person to person like a sacred torch, growing stronger with each holder. A quirk that can be transferred from person to person? Kirishima whispered. I'd say it's impossible, but that villain you fought, wait, why are you telling me this? My boy, you are worthy. Kirishima blinked, not sure if he misunderstood. Are you saying? My quirk is yours to inherit. Kirishima couldn't believe it. He actually began to tear up, deeply honored that All Might, possibly the greatest hero to ever live, considered him worthy of carrying on his legacy. Of all the students in UA, all the people who he could have chosen, All Might chose him. I accept, he said simply. Glad to hear it, my boy. He began to cough again. I'm sorry. I can't stay around to teach you how to use it. There's a pro hero named Gran Torino. He knows my secret, he'll help you. He looked up at Kirishima with fondness in his eyes. I know you'll use this power well. I will. I won't let you down. Kirishima's mind wandered back to that fateful day as he described his encounter to the others. All Might's death, Kirishima receiving his quirk, and Bakugo bearing the weight of being the one All Might died to save. Everything changed that day, but now the memory was tainted with bitterness, knowing the skeleton that lay hidden in Bakugo's closet. A skeleton with an extra toe joint. He was jarred out of the memory as Ishido punched the wall, prompting Yaoyorozu to freak out over the possibility of the wall being damaged. I can't believe this. I nearly torpedoed my own hero career before it even began when I joined that mission. And all this time, Bakugo was abusing his childhood friend like that? No wonder Midoriya hated that nickname. Uraraka lamented. Ugh. Ishido continued to rant, pacing around the room. All my life, I swore I'd be a hero and protect people from bullies. And Bakugo was one of them? It's just ugh. She stomped over to a nearby sofa and plopped down on it, still steaming. In all fairness, Yaoyorozu interjected, Bakugo was significantly more violent than anyone else in the class. That's an understatement, Uraraka said, chuckling. Remember that first sports festival? Bakugo and Shinso stood across from each other, glaring at one another as Present Mike introduced them in typical hammy Present Mike fashion. Well, Bakugo was glaring at least. Shinso was lazily maintaining the look of someone who fell asleep while skydiving. Not that Bakugo really cared, of course. This Gen Ed student was little more than a pebble in his path. Once this creep was out of the way, Bakugo would be able to advance to the finals and put Icy Hot in his place. Maybe he'd even pound some sense into that entitled prick for not giving it his all. He had no idea how this weakling made it to the semifinals. During the previous round he had been in Recovery Girl's office. And quite frankly he didn't care. He'd give this insect a taste of what real power was. And to think that monkey-tailed BD tried to give him advice. As if he needed an extra to give him information that the fight would be too short for him to use. The match began, and immediately Bakugo created popping explosions in his hand to intimidate his opponent before he charged. So, you're the powerhouse of one, are you? That's a lousy title. Excuse me, you little dash. Bakugo couldn't finish his retort because out of nowhere he clenched up. His mouth refused to move. In fact, everything wouldn't move. He could barely make a single explosion. What's going on? What did he do? Powerhouse indeed, Shinso sneered. Must be nice, being born with a perfect heroic quirk. Destructive, flashy, perfect for the entrance exam. All the good that does you now. Turn around and walk out of bounds. To Bakugo's horror, his body obeyed, robotically turning around and doing as Shinso commanded, stepping out of bounds. The crowd went absolutely nuts as Bakugo lost before a single attack could be launched. He feels himself regain control just as Present Mike announces that Shinso won the round. Snarling in primal rage, Bakugo immediately whirled around and, propelled by his explosions, propelled himself at the suddenly awake-looking upstart at high speeds, intent on giving him a piece of his mind. Before he reached the smug Gen Ed student, he found himself colliding headfirst into a rock wall that wasn't there 2 seconds ago, courtesy of Cementos. The fight is over, Bakugo, Midnight chided. The hell it was. Bakugo growled as he turned to face her. That wasn't a fight. I don't know what kind of trick he pulled dash. You went out of bounds after the fight started. That's a completely fair victory for him. No, it FNG wasn't. Let me back in there, I'm gonna dash. And that was as far as he got before a sudden wave of sleeping gas overcame him, sending him collapsing onto the hard floor. He was unceremoniously carried away while Shinso advanced to the finals. Of course, Shinso didn't get the chance to pull the same trick on Todoroki, as he was completely bowled over with a glacier 3 words into his taunt. Still, when the awards were handed out, Shinso was more than satisfied with his second-place medal. The same could not be said for Bakugo and his third-place medal, who was so dead set on getting that rematch he felt he deserved that in order to stop him from exploding Shinso right there on the podium, he had to be physically restrained. Shinso only side-eyed the explosive blonde with an insufferable look of smug satisfaction. Uraraka sighed again. I guess I was right though, that even at Hamada, he wouldn't want to make friends. Well, he seems to be happy with Hatsum, Yaoyorozu pointed out. That's true, but that's about it, Kirishima replied. He didn't mention anyone else. And he still seemed a little standoffish. Like he figured he'd be treated just as badly even there. But, you managed to get through to him, didn't you? Uraraka asked. I guess so. Do you have an idea? Asked Ishido, still stewing in her anger and disappointment. Yeah. I've been doing some thinking. What's the reason he blew me and Ishido off when we fought together? He thought you two were just trying to befriend him because he actually became a hero, Yaoyorozu answered. He didn't think your apology was sincere, that you were only trying for your own benefit. Then I had this thought, what if we tried to meet up with him out of costume? You know, not as heroes. Yaoyorozu put her hand to her chin as she considered this. Interesting, a show of humility. It's worth a shot. But we still don't know where to find him, Kirishima pointed out. Of course we do, Yaoyorozu said nonchalantly. He trained by cleaning Dagoba Beach, did he not? For him to choose that place to visit on such a regular basis, he'd have to live nearby. It's a safe bet that he lives in Mizudafu. Hey, pretty smart, Yamamo, Ishido complimented, causing the rich girl to blush. Let's head over there right now. Now? We could always just wait for tomorrow. Why try it now? Well, why not? It's summer, we still got plenty of daylight. And another thing, Kirishima chimed in, the realization dawning on him, there's no guarantee that he even lives there anymore, but while I was at Hatsum Industries, Midoriya said he'd be visiting his mother for dinner tonight. I see, Yaoyorozu said. She would likely still live at their old home. So today's one day we know for sure that he'll be there. Uraraka was about to add her opinion when Yaoyorozu's phone began ringing. The former class representative excused herself and walked away to pick it up. Hello there. Yaoyorozu Momo speaking. She listened to the response on the other side. Shinso? Why are you calling? The other 3 looked at each other in surprise before turning back to Yaoyorozu. Oh, you too? Yeah, we were just about to try that ourselves. Yeah. Of course. Yeah, meet us there. And don't come in costume. Well, I suppose as an underground hero you don't really have. I see. Right. Well, we'll meet up with you in an hour or so, alright? Right. See you then. She hung up the call and turned to the others. What did Shinso want? I think he wants to join the sleeper hit friendship squad. Still dressed incognito, Shinso prepared to walk to their designated meeting place, Dagoba Beach. He was a good distance away, and it wouldn't be for an hour or so he had plenty of time to stew in his thoughts. He couldn't look at that sports festival the same way anymore. He'd felt so proud of himself for taking those arrogant Hero Corps students down a peg, for taking down the second most powerful member of the class. He earned his spot in the class fair and square. He had beat the bias system that only allowed those with strong quirks to pass the exam. And for the rest of his time at UA, he sort of left it at that. But then Sleeper Hit came along and changed a few things. He suddenly felt stupid for whining about the exam. It was still biased, of course, no denying that. Fighting mindless robots was no way to judge heroic potential. He only learned about rescue points after the fact. But to learn that not only had a quirkless boy passed the exam with flying colors, but done it by acting as a true hero it was awfully humbling, to say the least. Of course, with it came the 1-2 punch of learning that Aizawa had bent the rules to their breaking point to allow him a spot in the class. Normally he'd feel honored his former mentor would go that far, but knowing that it had come at the expense of another student's future left a sour taste in his mouth. Any respect he had for Aizawa was shattered instantly. The man who saw him as more than just a creepy quirk had been unable to see past another boy's lack of one. He did take some satisfaction in learning that Aizawa would no longer be teaching at UA, and he was at least glad that Sleeper Hit made it as a pro hero regardless. But he still felt somewhat dirty being the benefactor of the sabotage of another student who, in all likelihood, had it even worse than him. In his youth, he always arrogantly thought that he'd rather be quirkless than have a villainous quirk, but now, he wasn't so sure. He honestly hoped to meet this guy for himself and compare notes. He knew it was pointless to dwell on what-ifs, but part of him couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like if they were classmates. Maybe he of all people might have seen me for who I was. Izuku prodded lethargically at his katsudon. It tasted as good as it always did, of course, it was his mother's cooking after all, but today was an emotional roller coaster for him and even his favorite comfort food wasn't doing much. Inko took note of this immediately. At some point after the debacle that was his first and only day at UA, Izuku finally told her about the bullying he received at the hands of his so-called best friend. Inko berated herself for not seeing the signs sooner and had taken extra special care to pay more attention to her son's behavior. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked, her motherly nature audible in her voice. "You said that mission was a success. Shouldn't this be a victory meal?" "Well, it's something that happened afterwards," Izuku confided. During the fight, 2 other pro heroes, Uravity and Alien Queen, showed up to help. I didn't remember Alien Queen that well, but she and Uravity were both in that UA class. "Really?" Inko said. Intrigued. "Yeah," Izuku nodded. After the fight, Uravity had the nerve to apologize to me. She turned on me and called me by that stupid insult Bakugo called me. And of course, now that I'm a hero, she came crawling back to apologize and try to sweep the whole thing under the rug. It's infuriating. He took a bite of hit katsudon as if to punctuate his point. Inko poked at her own food as she contemplated her response. Are you sure she wasn't really trying to make amends? That she really was being shallow and insincere? Are you kidding? She's in the same class as Bakugo. She didn't even bother to learn my name. Even as Izuku said this, Inko couldn't help but detect a subtle hint of doubt in her son's voice. Really? Inko pressed. Everyone in that class is just like him? Izuku opened his mouth to confirm that yes, they were, but he stopped, remembering Red Riot's visit to the workshop. I did meet up with Red Riot and he was all right. Inko sighed, smiling sadly. Izuku, honey, remember how, when you first tried to sign up for the hero course, I wasn't exactly supportive? Izuku was surprised by this change of direction. Why? For the longest time, I still saw you as a fragile little boy due to your lack of a quirk. But I realized that I had a duty as a mother to support you. And when you went to Hamada, you excelled. Do you really think I only started supporting you because you proved me wrong? Of course not. Izuku stammered. Never. I mean, even after I met Mei, you were my biggest supporter through most of my time there. So why don't you give that girl the same chance? The seeds of doubt planted by Red Riot's visit were sprouting now as Izuku digested her words. He'd rebuffed all of Uraraka's excuses, but he didn't really bother hearing her out. That I'll think about it, he said. Dinner went without much more conversation between the two, the taste of the katsudon growing more and more pronounced as the negativity in Izuku's thoughts turned into mere indecision and uncertainty. Finally, as dinner wrapped up and the sun was setting over the horizon, Izuku spoke up. Mom, I think I'm gonna head down to Dagoba Beach and clear my head. Of course, sweetie. I'd tell you to stay safe, but you are a pro hero, so I don't think I need to worry. Oh, what the heck? Stay safe, Izuku. Izuku smiled as he hugged his mother. Love you, Mom. Love you too, sweetie. Kirishima was the first to arrive at Dagoba Beach. He heard stories about how it had once been a literal dump, but one year the garbage had magically disappeared. Of course, it was still not very crowded compared to other beaches, but he still saw the odd beachgoers strolling on the now picturesque sands. There was even one in the distance, pushing a washing machine up the sands with very little difficulty. Wait, is that? He strolled up to get a closer look, and sure enough, wearing nothing more than a shirt, with the word, pants, written on it, and pants, which sadly did not have T-shirt written on them, was sleeper hit, his green hair contrasting against the red hue of the sunset. "Midoriya?" he called. Midoriya turned his head at the greeting. "Oh, Red Riot. You can call me Kirishima," the red-headed hero said. "Kirishima. Got it." He turned back toward the washing machine. I cleaned this whole beach a few years ago, while I was still training for UA. But it turns out that junk like this still washes up here on occasion. I find myself coming back here once a month or so. Community service, you know?" He chuckled. Was it Kirishima's imagination, or was he looking around to make sure no one was around? "Of course, it would be a lot easier if I had a quirk like yours. Or rather, a quirk like All Might's." It took some remarkable self-control for Kirishima to not freeze up. He prayed he didn't mean what he thought he meant. "What do you mean by that?" "Don't play dumb, Kirishima," Izuku said, though not with any rudeness or hostility. "I study quirks as a hobby. So I went all in on figuring out your quirk after it suddenly mutated like it did. So imagine my surprise when I dug around the deep web for a bit and found out that a relatively unknown hero named Shimura Nana, whose quirk involved floating, underwent an almost identical mutation as you did and gained a completely unrelated strength-enhancing ability, and that she just so happened to appear in old photos alongside a certain skeleton you probably know. And then I found her alongside another obscure hero who went through a very similar mutation. And considering All Might's history with a certain villain who proved that quirks could, in fact, be transferred from person to person, well, it wasn't hard to figure it out from there." Kirishima was stunned, and frankly a bit worried that someone had deciphered the secret of One for All. Izuku picked up on this immediately. "Don't worry," he said, "no one in the comments picked up on it. Hardly anyone knows about Shimura Nana, let alone has the time or patience to cross-reference her with 100-year-old dead heroes." Kirishima was a little relieved, but not entirely. "You aren't jealous of me, are you?" "Jealous? What do you mean?" "That you were born without a quirk, while I got 2 of them, one of which belonged to the number 1 hero." Izuku's eyes widened. "No, of course not," he said. "Well, I was at first. I was kinda livid, actually. But I did some thinking. The entire reason I was so dead set on becoming a hero was to give those like me, those society has deemed dead weight, the reassurance that they're not useless. And besides, I had May to help me get to that point just fine without one." He smiled fondly as he spoke his girlfriend's name. "And besides, your quirk is the perfect complement to his." "What do you mean by that?" "Think about it, if you received a strength enhancement that wasn't originally yours, there'd be a severe backlash as your body wouldn't have years and years to adapt to the sudden increase of force, and you'd run the risk of blowing yourself up with all that power, or at the very least breaking every bone in your body. But combined with a quirk that lets you reinforce your body to the point of near indestructibility, it effectively negates the drawbacks of such a power, or at the very least makes it manageable." Kirishima looked a little surprised. He'd never really thought of that, but it made sense. Indeed, he felt a lot of pain when he first tried using One for All and instinctively activated his original quirk as a reflex, which didn't negate a lot of the pain, but it did prevent significant bodily harm. "So no, I'm not jealous," Izuku reiterated. "You have your niche in the hero community, and I've got mine." Kirishima grinned. We ought to work together sometime. With your brain power and my regular power, we'd be the manliest men to ever be called men." Izuku actually laughed a bit. "You know what? I'll keep that in mind." "Hey, Kirishima. There you are," a high-pitched voice called as 3 female figures ran down to meet them. "Shinso isn't here yet, but oh." Midoriya was surprised to see that the voice belonged to Uraraka. Except she wasn't in costume, just dressed in casual clothing, as were the 2 behind her, Ashido and... "Wait, is that Creati?" "Well, that was easier than I thought," Ashido said. "Hey Uraraka, Ashido," Izuku greeted uncertainly. "And, it's nice to meet you, Creati." "Call me Yaoyorozu," the tall black-haired girl insisted. "Yaoyorozu. Right." Izuku nodded. "What are you all doing here?" "We wanted to come down and apologize again while we're all off duty," Ashido said. "And Yamamo wanted to meet you too." She used to be our class rep, actually. Well, she was the vice rep until... Her tone fell, pausing before she continued. Anyway, I guess she just wanted to meet you herself. It's a pleasure to meet you, Midoriya, the taller girl said. Likewise, Izuku replied. Truth be told, he was feeling especially guilty now. Given his preconceived notions about Class 1A, what he knew about the Yaoyorozu family, and the nature of her costume, Izuku had previously made some rather nasty assumptions about her that he was really coming to regret. Especially since he could tell by the way she carried herself that she wasn't exactly one to flaunt anything, be it her wealth or her body. Geez, I really misjudged them, didn't I? He was about to bring this up and apologize to her when Uraraka stepped forward. Midoriya, I really just wanted to dash. The greenette held up his hand to interrupt her, taking a deep breath as he made his decision. You don't have to say anything. You apologized to me earlier, and I brushed you off. Look, you had every right to be angry with me, Uraraka said. I hurt you. Even if I didn't mean to, I did. And I understand now how much it must have affected you. That I'm not gonna lie, it did hurt, Izuku said. But I shouldn't have been so quick to assume the worst of you. Bakugo has that tone of voice no matter what he says, so it's hard to tell when he's insulting someone and when he's talking normally. So I guess I can't blame you for not realizing it was an insult. Honestly, Uraraka said, I thought it was a shorter form of Dikairu. It sounded kinda cute, actually. Izuku thought about that response. I guess I can see that. So, Uraraka brightened up a bit, her voice hopeful. But am I forgiven? No. Uraraka gasped softly. Oh. Because there's nothing to forgive, Izuku finished. It took Uraraka a moment to process this, but once she got over the mental and emotional whiplash. Hey, that was mean. Yeah, Izuku said, chuckling. I guess it was. The five of them had a pretty good laugh over that. Izuku was surprised at how much weight seemed to be lifted off his shoulders simply by forgiving Uraraka, and he honestly felt guilty for bearing so much of a grudge against her for so long. He still had some baggage, obviously, but for the time being it didn't really matter. Now, all Izuku wanted to do was make up for lost time, maybe get to know these guys a bit better. Maybe at some point he might even be able to call them friends. Today had been an emotional roller coaster for him, and he imagined everyone involved. But all things considered, it had ended on a pretty high note if he said so himself. If only it were that simple. To say that Bakugo Katsuki hadn't matured since his enrollment at UA would be inaccurate. Sure, he was still volatile, and he still had his trademark pride if his hero name, King Nitro, was any indication, even if his original hero name had been turned down. He had begrudgingly taken the hint that, at UA, he wasn't top dog anymore. Then Kamino happened. Bakugo could practically hear the whispers wherever he went. He knew he was being called the boy All Might died to save, but he knew what they really meant. He was the boy who killed All Might. He had become obsessed with regaining his position at the top despite those extras holding him back. In fact, SHY Hair had somehow gotten crazy powerful after the fact. He wouldn't have it. He had to be the strongest. When the provisional license exam started, Bakugo thought he was a shoo-in. He had pushed himself to the very limit, and he was going to come out on top. He had to. He needed to convince the world, convince himself, that All Might didn't die in vain. But then he caught a glimpse of unruly green hair at the exam and all his focus went right down the drain. The sudden burst of anger must have clouded his judgment and distracted him. How else could he have failed the test? He kicked himself for it later. How could that quirkless Deku have made it into a hero school, let alone into the provisional license exam on the first year? It was memory playing tricks on him, his subconscious reminding him that he was being looked down on. It couldn't be anything else. And for some reason he couldn't fathom, those extras in his class, SHY Hair in particular, just wouldn't leave him be. Thankfully they didn't drag him down either, so he humored them. They were less obnoxious than those hangers-on from junior high. Still obnoxious, but not useless. With his license finally officially making him a hero, he set about his work with an impressive arrest record for his first year, making even Endeavor's impressive record turn its head. But it wasn't enough, if his placement at number 38 was any indication. He was in his apartment stewing, preparing to hit the hay early, when his phone vibrated. One of the extras must have texted him. Bakugo checked out his phone and saw that SHY Hair had texted him a link. What the F is he? He paused. His eyes were drawn to those of the green-haired hero sitting across from that interviewer. The green-haired hero who didn't have a quirk. The green-haired hero who was ranked above him by 7 spots. All at once, every ounce of anger that had laid dormant since the provisional exam, every memory of Deku's insufferable condescension, every voice telling him he had no excuse not to be the strongest, all of it came flooding back to him. At the very least, Bakugo had the foresight to grab the ear protection from his hero costume before he exploded. As Bakugo stomped down the beach to meet them, the few beachgoers who were nearby wisely opted to get the heck out of the blast radius. They all recognized King Nitro and knew better than to be nearby when he was in one of his moods. Izuku and the other 4 stepped away from that rusted washing machine to meet him. "I thought I was finally rid of you, Deku," Bakugo growled. "I thought I could finally move on with my life, that you'd finally taken the hint and given up. But after all these years, I find out you're still looking down on me." Uraraka gulped. He sounded absolutely livid. After what she had learned about their history, she cringed on Izuku's behalf. That was when Yaoyorozu noticed something. "Uraraka, why is he in his hero costume?" The brunette blinked. Yaoyorozu was right. Bakugo was completely decked out in his intimidating hero costume, complete with those distinctive grenade-shaped gauntlets. But why would he? Oh no. Izuku looked like he was going to open his mouth to reply, but Bakugo pointed at him, silencing him. "How long have you been looking down on me? How many strings did you pull to place above me?" Bakugo dash. "And how the hell did you even get a hero license? You were expelled." "In case you haven't realized," Izuku shouted, cutting off Bakugo's rant, "UA isn't the only hero school out there." The blonde growled. "So, that was you at the provisional license exam. You made me fail, you motherfucker. Made you F, I went out of my way to avoid you. Don't pin this on me," Bakugo continued. "You sabotaged me at the exam. Now answer the DM in question, how did you get above me? You owe me an explanation." "With all due respect, Bakugo," Kirishima cut in, stepping in front of Izuku, "he doesn't owe you a thing." Izuku peeked around Kirishima's shoulder, raising a finger. "You don't dash." "The hell he doesn't," Bakugo continued, not realizing that this was the first time Kirishima had used his name without inserting bro into it. "He's been a thorn in my side since we were kids." "What did he ever do to you?" Uraraka asked, joining Kirishima in front of their new friend. "You're the one who bullied him." Really guys, you don't dash." "That effer thought he was better than me. He was always looking down on me, even though he didn't have a quirk. He needed to be put back in his place." "So you admit it," Ashido added, joining into the human wall that was beginning to form in front of Midoriya. "You nearly broke him, you know. If he didn't get into Hamada dash." "Of course I didn't break him," Bakugo interrupted. "That's what's so infuriating. No matter how many times I burned him, he always kept on going like nothing happened, following me around, dragging me down, he just wouldn't break." Yaoyorozu stepped into the line with those 4. "And you wanted to see him break?" "Of course I did," Bakugo shouted. "Because if he didn't break, if I'm weaker than Deku, then what does that make me? Ever since Kamino, people have been looking down on me, pitying me, blaming me. I have to be the strongest. And after all I've been through, Deku still came out on top. Izuku is 10 times the hero you'll ever be," Uraraka glared. "Enough." All 4 of the classmates, standing side by side, jumped as Izuku parted through them. "Look, I appreciate you standing up for me. It feels nice, having so many people in my corner." He looked each of them dead in the eye. "But this is my battle to fight." Hesitantly, the other 4 nodded, backing off. Izuku turned back to Bakugo. "You still became a hero, didn't you?" he asked. "I didn't crush your dream, unlike what you tried to do to mine. It doesn't matter. Now whenever people look at me, they'll only see a pathetic weakling who ranked below someone who doesn't even have a FING quirk. And you're the only one? Izuku asked incredulously. Have you ever stopped to think about how rare it is for a hero to make the top 50 right after graduating? Your entire class had a head start due to all the villains, admittedly, but it's still something very few heroes can say. So you're saying you're better than us? That you managed your spot without being attacked in school? No, I just dash. You're nothing but a weakling who got lucky and cheated his way to the top, Bakugo continued, pointing at Izuku. And we'd all be better off if you'd just taken my advice and thrown yourself off the roof. There was a pause. A horrible, deafening moment of silence where time seemed to grind to a screeching halt. Yaoyoro's gasped. Uraraka glared daggers. Kirishima's jaw dropped. Ashido looked like she was about to throw up. You don't mean to tell me you actually meant it? Izuku asked, shocked, his face going pale. Maybe not when I said it, Bakugo growled, but now? Even if you didn't get a quirk in your next life, at least then you'd have left that spot on the rankings to someone who actually deserved it. Like you? Ashido questioned. The only thing you deserve is for your license to get set on fire and then for the ashes to get set on fire. Bakugo looked like he was about to fire back when Kirishima threw in his own 2 cents. Bakugo, when Shigaraki said you were more like a villain than a hero. He was right all along. Now it was Bakugo's turn to go pale. He turned to look at the redhead, who wouldn't meet his eyes. That SHY-haired extra who had always hung onto him despite Bakugo's many protests, who still saw Bakugo as above him despite his own strength. Bakugo didn't know why it stung, to have him finally turn his back on him. It wasn't long before Bakugo turned his ire back to the one whose fault this was. Whose fault everything was. This is nobody's fault but your own, Izuku said simply, his voice low. I know you came here looking for a fight. And if you want one so bad, I'm going to give you one. Right here, right now. Bakugo didn't need to be told twice. His hands held out, he began to heat up, small explosions dancing on his palms with that horrible popping sound. I'm gonna effing kill you. Midoriya, let us help you. Kirishima said, red lightning beginning to crackle around his arms. You're a great fighter, but without your gear, Uraraka added, you'll get seriously hurt. I appreciate your willingness to help, Izuku shouted, raising his voice to be heard over the explosions, but this is between us two. This fight has been a long time coming and I have to do this alone. He turned back to the other 4, his hands in his pockets. Also, bold of you to assume I don't have my gear. Bakugo screamed, launching himself towards Izuku, propelled through the air by his explosions, raising his fist to deliver a powerful hook once his momentum had built up sufficiently. Izuku whirled back around to face Bakugo, pulling his hands out of his pockets to reveal they were now wearing gloves with some metallic paneling. Said paneling immediately began to unfold outward, and almost instantly, Uraraka recognized the same gauntlets that had served Izuku so well when they fought the Lizard Gang. Courtesy of Hatsum Industries, Izuku quipped before bring his armored hand up to catch Bakugo's punch, which delivered an electric shock in the process. Bakugo screamed as jolts of electricity pulsed from the gloves before he overpowered the current, bringing his other arm up and igniting an explosion in Izuku's face. Fortunately, his movements were slowed by the electricity, meaning Izuku had ample time to bring his other arm to block the explosion. This protected him from serious harm, but the force knocked Izuku back a few meters. The green-haired hero quickly did a backflip and regained his footing, stabilizing his landing with one hand while his other reached into his pocket to pull out a remarkably pocket-sized grappling gun. Bakugo launched forward once again, explosions crackling in his hands, but before he could strike, Izuku fired the grappling gun directly at Bakugo's gauntlet mid-flight. The cable wrapped around it as Izuku dodged out of the way, holding on tight as Bakugo's momentum caused him to blow right past him. Izuku pressed a button on the grappling gun and the cable went taut. He planted his feet firmly and yanked on the cable, causing Bakugo to spin around him before the green net let the cable relax, uncoiling from the grenade gauntlet and letting Bakugo fly directly into the rusted washing machine, crashing into it with a solid crack as the old, broken appliance broke into pieces. Bakugo got back up to his feet, wiping his mouth with his left arm. Fighting defensively and keeping your distance, he taunted. Of course you'd rely on those cowardly tactics. It's called fighting intelligently. Of course, you wouldn't know about that now, would you? Izuku shot back. Oh ho! Bakugo grinned before bringing up his other arm, aiming the cannon on his gauntlet towards Izuku. Then by all means get as far as you can, 'cause there's no way you can dodge this. He pulled the pin from his right gauntlet and aimed it squarely at Izuku, who was out of melee range, but not nearly far enough to dodge the blast in time. As the nitroglycerin in the gauntlet began to ignite, Kirishima began to fire up the red lightning once again. Their fight or not, I'm not letting him do this alone. Hardening himself to the point of indestructibility, the defensive power of his natural quirk enhanced by the power of one for all, he flung himself in between the two, ignoring Yaoyorozu's protests. Get close to me! Yaoyorozu shouted to Uraraka and Ishido, pulling her shirt up a bit so as to create a blast shield for the three. Kaboom! The shield was created just in time as the deafening explosion caused a massive flash of light that was blinding to anyone who saw it. Bakugo chuckled triumphantly, but frowned when the dust cleared and there stood a somewhat singed Kirishima, the red lightning still crackling around his rigid, stone-like body as he glared daggers at his former best friend as he stood in the center of what looked like a crater of broken glass. That was so unmanly. I have to concur, Yaoyorozu said, stepping out from behind the blast shield she created along with Ishido. Those are meant to be used against the strongest villains. You should be ashamed of using them against another hero. He's no hero. Bakugo sneered. And if he's such a great hero, then where is that coward? Wheel. Ishido said, smirking, that he's above you. Literally this time. Wah. Suddenly, the grappling cable reappeared out of nowhere, coming from above and clinging to his gauntlet again. Release. It was then that Bakugo realized Uraraka didn't step out from behind the blast shield. He looked up at the source of the voice and sure enough, Uraraka was floating above them, her hands pressed together as she usually did as she released her quirk's effect on something. His eyes widened as he realized that Izuku was also in the air, holding the grappling gun, and as Uraraka released him, Izuku let the cable pull him towards Bakugo at tremendous speed. The blonde had no time to react before a metal gauntlet, pulled along by the withdrawing cable and going faster than terminal velocity, collided directly with his face with a satisfying thwack. Now, Bakugo was no stranger to taking hits, but his nose was bleeding from the impact. As he wiped away the blood, he pointed at Izuku again. So you think you're so tough when you've got all those weapons on you and all those extras to cover for you? 'Cause you know you can't beat me in a fair fight. Why don't you drop all the gear and prove me wrong, huh? Maybe if you ditch the gauntlets, Izuku retorted. Then we'll talk. Bakugo's glare deepened as he grumbled to himself. Then, to the shock of everyone present, he actually removed his gauntlets, laying them down on the sand. Izuku sighed. Well, let it not be said that I'm not a man of my word. Izuku pressed a button on the side of his left gauntlet, collapsing the metal plating down and leaving him with the black glove. Then he did the same to his other glove. He took those, along with his grappling gun and a couple other tools, and handed them to Yaoyorozu, who used her quirk to synthesize a burlap sack to hold them. That done, Izuku cracked his knuckles and assumed a stance similar to that of a kickboxer. Your move, Bakugo. Bakugo once again rocketed towards Izuku, once again raising his arm for the same predictable hook. Either he's never figured out how to be unpredictable, Izuku thought as he caught Bakugo's arm and flipped him over, throwing him down onto the sand, or he still isn't taking me seriously. Bakugo got to his feet quickly and began to strike Izuku with rapid quirk-enhanced palm strikes. There was no way Izuku could block him, so he had to settle for sweeping Bakugo's arms aside instead, backing away as the explosive blonde gained ground. The blonde's strikes were fast, making Izuku realize Bakugo was actually quite adept at hand-to-hand combat. Up until now he had been relying on single, powerful attacks, but now that he was in close quarters and using actual fighting moves, it was all Izuku could do to keep himself from getting burned. Attacking with my hands is out, he'd block easily and he'd punish that attack with his quirk. And for the legs, Izuku went for Bakugo's legs with a sweeping kick, knocking Bakugo off balance, but he landed in a handstand, flipped backwards, and rocketed back to Izuku. Okay, without those big bulky gauntlets of his, he's much more agile. Good to know. Izuku knew Bakugo wouldn't attempt that hook a third time, so instead of trying to predict what attack to block, Izuku opted to dodge instead, rolling to the side towards the ocean, getting sand in his hair in the process. Bakugo made more rapid palm strikes, and once again, Izuku brushed them aside rather than try to block them, again losing ground and finding himself backed against the ocean. Suddenly, Bakugo brought his knee up and struck Izuku in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him and leaving himself open for Bakugo to hit him with an explosion. Ugh! Izuku cried as he fell back from the force of the explosion, hitting the shallow water. Bakugo smirked now that he'd landed a solid hit. Izuku knew Bakugo wouldn't let up, so he rolled out of the way, ignoring the searing pain on his stomach and the sting of salt water in his eyes. As he began to get back to his feet, he looked up just in time to see Bakugo starting to build up some bigger explosions in his hand. So he got a knockdown on me and now he's getting greedy. This is my chance. He sprung to his feet and just barely managed to avoid an explosive palm strike, feeling the heat graze his cheek as he spun around. With Bakugo reeling from the miss, in one fluid motion Izuku roundhouse kicked Bakugo square in the jaw, launching him out of the shallows into the deeper water. Bakugo splashed down, Izuku catching his breath as he waited for Bakugo to surface. Kaboom! A giant pillar of water erupted as Bakugo once again exploded, spraying salt water everywhere. Like a monster from one of those kaiju movies, Bakugo stormed back onto the beach, murder in his eyes. Izuku frowned. I thought submerging him might disable his quirk. I guess I was wrong. Once again, Bakugo held out both of his arms, creating sparks in both of them as Izuku once again assumed a defensive stance. On the bright side, Bakugo's not thinking clearly. He's beyond angry, and while it's making him stronger, it's hampering his fighting abilities. I might be able to fizzle. Bakugo blinked as the explosions in his hands suddenly died down. He looked down at them in confusion, as did Izuku. Wait, what? Bakugo's quirk was working fine before. How did? Honestly, a gruff, tired-sounding voice drawled from nearby. I've been standing here for a good long while and only now you're noticing me? I thought I taught you better than this. Every head in the area turned to see none other than Aizawa, his eyes glowing red, his hair floating around him as he stared down Bakugo, disabling his quirk. Aizawa? Yaoyorozu asked, legitimately surprised. What are you dash? A little birdie told me there was an impromptu class reunion going on here, and that same little birdie saw King Nitro stomping down there uninvited. Then, Izuku began. That little birdie was. Out from behind Aizawa stepped Shinso, who looked like he desperately needed either a drink or a nap. Maybe both. Sorry I'm late, he said. But I saw a blast-beam explode heading your direction and in spite of recent events, I figured I should let Aizawa know. Izuku turned to face his teacher of one day. So you were watching that whole fight? And you didn't think to step in when he used his gauntlets on me? I needed to make an informed decision, and Bakugo's willingness to use maximum force against a fellow hero was the nail in the coffin. Nail in the coffin? Izuku muttered. Informed decision? What? It was then that he saw what Aizawa was holding. It was a cell phone with a red light blinking, indicating it was recording. Izuku had to admit, all the abuse he'd endured at Bakugo's hands might have been worth it just to see the blood completely drain from Bakugo's face. The blonde stammered. You were recording that? Indeed. The entire fight, along with your little conversation beforehand. I have to say, the Hero Public Safety Commission will be really interested in hearing some of the things you said. Throw himself off the roof, you say? Izuku couldn't believe what was happening. Was Aizawa really going to? Even as Aizawa hit the send button, Izuku still wasn't convinced this wasn't an elaborate hallucination brought upon by Bakugo exploding him in the face. Bakugo, Aizawa said as he pocketed his phone, don't be surprised if someone from the commission shows up and asks for you to hand over your license. Shinso stepped towards an increasingly flabbergasted Bakugo with an impassive expression. I guess at least one of my first impressions was right on the money. Bakugo glared at him. And what's that supposed to dash? He didn't get further than that as he froze in place. Shinso shook his head. Are you ever not going to fall for that? Well, go home and rethink your life. Bakugo mindlessly walked back off the beach, not even bothering to recover his gauntlets while under Shinsu's control. Aizawa looked back at Bakugo and sighed. I honestly thought maybe I'd gotten through to him. I guess I hadn't dissected his issues as well as I thought. He turned back to Izuku, who was looking at him with uncertainty. The erasure hero sighed heavily. Midoriya, I've done a massive disservice to you. I pride myself on being a rational person, but when I expelled you, I was massively hypocritical and blinded by my own bias. The quirkless hero shrugged. Honestly, I'm over it by now. I became a hero without UA. I'm not really Dash. Midoriya, there's something I need to confess to you. When you took the quirk apprehension test, you actually came 19th. But I was looking for someone to remove from the class so there'd be a position for Shinso to fill. But as an underground hero, I placed more value on Hagecure's stealth capabilities than your raw skill. So you rigged the scores, Midoriya finished. Yaoyorozu and Kirishima looked up at Aizawa with looks of sheer betrayal, Ashido and Uraraka looking back and forth between their former teacher in disbelief. Despite what you said, you knew I didn't lack potential, but you expelled me anyway? Izuku pressed. His voice carried the tone of sheer disappointment, rather than outrage. I've tried to rationalize it, but believe you me, nothing I can say can possibly excuse what I did to you. Had it not been for Hamada, I may very well have ruined your life. I sincerely apologize. There was a tense, uncomfortable silence between everyone still standing on the beach. I don't think I can forgive you, Midoriya admitted. At least right now. I don't expect you to. You should know I am no longer teaching at UA. And in fact, I suspect my teaching license will be revoked soon, along with my pro hero license. A few of my colleagues caught wind of what I did and they weren't pleased about my actions. You ever been on the receiving end of Midnight's whip when she's not playing around? Can't say I have, Izuku said. You don't want to. Aizawa looked Izuku in the eyes. I'm meeting with the Hero Commission tomorrow to discuss both my missteps as well as Bakugo's. Hopefully, bringing him to justice for what he did to you will help repair some of the damage I've done to you. Maybe, it's just, the last thing All Might ever did was save him, and if that last act of heroism was ruin Dash. Don't worry about the grisly details going public, Aizawa reassured. When Bakugo is punished, the Hero Commission will likely just say it was due to unheroic actions and not go into further depth. Now if you'll excuse me, I must get back to my patrol. He turned to leave before looking back to the boy he once dismissed. You know, you really impressed me with that fight. If I manage to keep my license through all of this, I hope to work alongside you one day. And just as suddenly as he arrived, Aizawa strode away, disappearing down the street past the beach. Uraraka turned to look at Izuku, who looked as though he'd had the rug pulled out from under him and hadn't realized gravity had taken hold of him yet. Izuku? Are you okay? HM? Oh yeah, yes. I'll get over it. Eventually. He turned to Shinso, wanting to change the subject. So, Shinso, huh? You're the persuasive hero, Blackout. Yeah, that's me. I've actually done some research on you, and I have so many questions about your quirk. Shinso raised his eyebrow. Like, I know you need the other person to respond for it to work, but can you respond to nonverbal responses, like a nod? Shinso hadn't considered that, but before he could answer, Izuku shot more of them out. Does the strength of your control depend on the kind of response? If you got multiple people to talk to you at once, could you control them all at once? As Izuku shot question after question at Shinso, who was struggling to keep up with all the inquiries, Uraraka couldn't help but let out a laugh. He's strong. He'll be even stronger for this experience, and he'll have us to back him up. Seeing Izuku once again in his natural environment of analyzing quirks, the tension dissolved almost entirely. The members of the Hell class knew that they had found a new friend and ally, and in spite of all that had happened, he was going to be all right. A month later. Probation, huh? Midoriya asked as he calmly stroked a black and white cat. Yeah. The commission decided that though my actions towards you were reprehensible, they were actions taken as a teacher and not a pro hero, so I was given a warning that said I lost my teaching license. Though I never intended on going back to teaching after I resigned, Aizawa replied, petting an orange cat. Midoriya and Aizawa had met up at a cat cafe near UA and were catching up, much more cordially than at the beach. It had been Midoriya's idea to meet here, actually, though he had a specific reason for asking to meet him now. You resigned as a teacher? I thought you were fired. Yes. Well, you see, after I expelled you, Shinso wasn't able to actually be part of the class until after the sports festival. So there was a hole in the class when the USJ incident happened. 2 of my students died that day. And I can't help but wonder if the outcome would have been different if you were in my class like you were supposed to be. So you're worried their blood might be on your hands? Exactly. I know dwelling on what-ifs is unhealthy. No, I totally understand, Aizawa, Midoriya admitted. All throughout my time at Hamada, I've had an unhealthy grudge against your class based on faulty first impressions, and I never bothered to make many friends out of fear of being burned again. So many opportunities wasted. The two continued to interact with the cats in silence before Izuku spoke up a minute later. I haven't heard anything about Bakugo though. What happened to him? His license was revoked, Aizawa said bluntly, not holding back. Simple as that. Really? Izuku gasped, a little shocked. But all that bullying was before you. Trust me, if UA had known about the bullying, if your previous teachers had penalized him like they were supposed to, we wouldn't have let him into the entrance exam. But that's besides the point. Even if his actions are far in the past, the incident on the beach proves that despite UA's attempts, his behavior hadn't changed much and his maturity was incredibly fragile. What's he doing now? Last I heard? Anger management, therapy, and community service. Oh, I see, Izuku said, rolling his eyes. The commission probably required those for him to get his license back. Actually no, Aizawa corrected. The commission has no intention of restoring his license, and they've made that perfectly clear. Bakugo's doing those things of his own free will. Izuku looked at him in skepticism. Really? That's sudden of him. If I had to guess, it was Kirishima cutting him out of his life that did it. Guess it's a case of him not knowing what he had until it was gone. Wow. The commission has no intention of restoring his pro-hero status, but since he's been on good behavior, there's talk of letting him act provisionally. You know, in all hands-on-deck situations, like those Nomu attacks a while back. The greenette continued stroking the cat as he remained deep in thought. I didn't think Bakugo had it in him. So Midoriya, I know you didn't call me here just to catch up. What do you want? Midoriya took a deep breath and smiled. Well, I finally popped the question to Mei, and of course she said yes. Oh, congratulations. And, well, ever since that day a month ago, I've been meeting the other members of the Hell class and a few of the other UA graduates. Mirio introduced me to Eri, and we got along swell. She's a sweet girl, and I wanted her to be the flower girl at my wedding. And since you're her legal guardian, I figured I should ask you. She'd love that, I think. Of course, I guess that means I have no choice but to let you come to the wedding too. Aizawa looked legitimately surprised. You're really inviting me to your wedding? Allowing. Make no mistake, this is just because I want Eri to be there, Midoriya said sharply, not because I've forgiven you. I see. Another silence. Although I have forgiven you. You have. What can I say? Izuku said, smiling sadly. Holding grudges is exhausting. I didn't know how true that was until just recently. Well then I'm glad. And I would be honored to attend. Just, while you're there, please try not to look like a hobo? Izuku asked with a long-suffering voice. Don't worry, even I have standards. That's good to hear. Of course, what Izuku didn't tell Aizawa was that he'd also invited Ms. Joke and personally ensured that she and Aizawa would be seated next to each other. Even though he had indeed forgiven Aizawa, Izuku felt he was still allowed to be just a little petty. You can hardly blame him for that, right? Of the underground heroes of the Hell class, only one of them bothered to hang out with the daylight heroes, and that was Hagakure. Not only was she more social by nature than Shinso or Tokoyami, But her quirk meant that she was one of the few underground heroes who actually could operate by daylight. She was talkative and outgoing, which most suspected was her way of being visible. That made sense to most people. After all, even though invisibility was far from being the worst quirk out there, it must have been pretty hard for her to grow up with no one able to see her, so she developed her bright, cheery, impossible-to-miss personality to compensate. Which is why Ojiro was so disturbed that Hagakure hadn't said a single word beyond a somewhat distracted, "Hey," this entire reunion. The graduates of the Hell class often did meet up from time to time, though usually not all at once, like that fateful hero ranking. This particular gathering, taking place at the Creati Hero office, only had a few members present. It was more of a small lunch party than anything else. There were Ojiro and Hagakure, of course. Yaoyorozu was there since it was her agency after all. Shiro, Kaminari, Shoji, and Jair were also there. Kaminari and Jair were chatting it up, as were Shiro and Shoji. But Hagakure was eerily silent, standing aloof from the others, a glass in hand. Ojiro sighed and walked up to her, concerned for his friend and hoping it was nothing. "Toru? Is everything okay?" He couldn't really tell, but it looked and sounded like the invisible heroine was startled out of her thoughts. "Oh, hey Mashireo." Her voice lacked a lot of the pep it usually had. "Is something wrong?" the tailed martial artist asked, a little out of his depth. Even if he found out what was eating her, comforting people wasn't something he considered himself great at. "I don't know." Hagakure sighed, sitting down on a nearby chair, Ojiro following suit. "You don't mind listening?" "Sure, I don't mind." "All right." Hagakure took a deep breath and downed a bit of her drink. It's about what happened with Aizawa and Midoriya." Ojiro raised an eyebrow. "Didn't we find out about all that a month ago?" "We kinda did, but I learned something yesterday. It all started when me and a few other underground heroes were getting ready to sneak into a warehouse full of trigger." "All right," Brave's getting into position. "Remember the plan, transparency?" Ms. Joke asked through Hagakure's, equally invisible, earpiece. Even though she was invisible, she instinctively hid behind a large bush near the back entrance of the large warehouse, hidden by the trees of the forest around it. "Sneak up to the door, wait for you and Mr. Brave to cause a distraction, slip in while the guards are occupied, infiltrate the security room." "Got it," she responded. "Again, I'm really glad to help. I've never worked on a job this big before." "I'm sure you won't disappoint," the more experienced underground hero replied. "I'm just glad you were available on such short notice. Oh, and make sure you don't get caught. Some of these villains might have hopped themselves up on trigger themselves." "I understand," she nodded. She was already aware of the possibility of these guys having their quirks enhanced with the drag they were shipping. But something didn't add up. "Actually, I know I wasn't here for the planning, but I have a question." "Yeah. If we might be dealing with super strong quirks, why isn't Eraserhead here?" There was a brief pause. "You didn't know?" Joke answered, her voice sounding uncharacteristically annoyed. "He's on probation." "What?" Hagakure replied, shocked. "This is Brave," the voice of the other hero cut in. "You all ready?" "We're ready." "Transparency, we can talk about this later. You know what to do." "Right." True to their word, Mr. Brave soon charged out of the trees, followed by Ms. Joke. The surprised guards took out their weapons, but this was child's play to the two experienced pro heroes, who quickly began fighting them. Behind the scuffle, Hagakure quietly slipped into the back entrance and began softly walking through the dimly lit hallways. Passing by a few guards who were none the wiser to her presence, she had time to think as she hunted the security room. Aizawa-sensei? On probation? What could have happened? She walked past a door in the hallway, before doubling back and looking inside. Within was a dark room full of monitors, a few people sitting and watching the security camera feed. Hagakure got within striking range of the technicians and swiftly knocked them out, the second one panicking and being taken down before he could sound the alarm. As she tied up the two unconscious villains and gagged them. After that, she took out a USB drive, inserted it, and began to work, so she had some more time to think. His probation couldn't have had anything to do with sleeper hit, could it? He did that as a teacher, not as a pro hero. And besides, he didn't technically do anything he couldn't. Teachers at UA still had the power to expel students for any reason. This is transparency. The security room is clear, sending you the feed now, she spoke, typing away on the keyboard. Outside the base, the security camera feed was transferred to their phones. Got it? Meet up with us at the rendezvous point, Brave instructed. Right. Hagakure left the room, making sure to lock the door behind her, and made her way to the others. The rest of the raid went without incident. These villains were amateurs and went down fairly easily. Compared to the villains she'd fought during the school year, Hagakure didn't think they were all that tough. The police were in the process of arresting the villains when she finally decided to return to the earlier question. So what happened with Eraserhead? Ms. Joke sighed, then looked her in the eye. Or at least where she thought her eyes were. I'm guessing you already know about how he expelled that quirkless kid a few years ago for coming in last place on the quirk apprehension test? Aha, Hagakure affirmed. Well, not too long ago, he admitted to the Hero Commission that he actually tampered with the results of that test, she explained. He said he wanted an excuse to make room for another student he'd been preparing for the Hero course. Hagakure felt her heart stop. No, this can't mean what I think it means. So Midoriya didn't get last place on it? No. He purposely sabotaged one of his students. So he got into some hot water with both the commission and the faculty at UA. They didn't. She kept explaining, but Hagakure couldn't hear. The sound around her began to grow dull as the realization set in. She had scored 19th on that test. She had felt guilty about it at the time, but when she watched Midoriya walk dejectedly back to the locker, she had felt a profound sense of relief that she just barely made the cut, especially since she knew that her teacher wasn't bluffing. She would be expelled if she didn't measure up. But now she knew. She knew the only reason she was even still here was because her teacher had cheated. Ojiro was stunned as Hagakure finished explaining, and even more so when it sounded like she was beginning to cry. I felt so proud of making it into UA, of becoming a hero. It was my dream, my way of being seen, I guess, and it turns out I'm only even here because of a fluke. Ojiro was at a loss. He had never seen Hagakure so despondent before. The two had usually stuck together throughout their time at UA, and she had always been the more extroverted of the two, but now, it was honestly kind of scary. It feels wrong, you know? Like I stole the opportunity from someone else. But I don't really deserve it. She sighed heavily, taking another drink. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like an imposter. Someone who shouldn't even be here. The tailed martial artist took a deep breath, not really knowing what to say. Of course, he couldn't just say nothing. But I know a little what you're feeling, he confessed. Back at that first sports festival, I dropped out because I spent the entire second round being controlled, he said with a shiver. To this day, he was never able to look Shinso in the eye. I know how it feels to have something that doesn't feel earned. But this is a bit different. You still got here through your own effort. You didn't have anyone carry you. You just... He paused. He was about to say that she had merely had an obstacle removed her path, but referring to Midoriya as an obstacle felt very wrong. Of course, Hagakure finished the thought herself. I know I put in the effort, but if it wasn't Midoriya who got expelled, it would have been me. That's not true, Ojiro countered. Remember all the trouble the class got into? Every time it happened, Aizawa would make a point not to expel anyone because our potential wasn't zero. The man had the highest expulsion rate of any teacher at UA, so that restraint means something. A lot of good that did Midoriya, Hagakure said bitterly. Aizawa specifically wanted a slot open for Shinso. If Midoriya's spot had gone to, I dunno, Kendo from Class B, then I would have been on the chopping block. Ojiro didn't really have an answer for that. Well, you can't exactly drop out of being a hero like I dropped out of the festival, he pointed out. You're right, she admitted. But I can't help but feel I don't deserve to be one, if I only got here thanks to someone else's failure. Midoriya's hardly what I'd call unsuccessful though, Ojiro pointed out. That's true. She sighed. I just haven't been able to concentrate on hero work. I keep feeling like I'm not good enough. Like I'm taking the place of someone who deserves it more. I know I'm not, she added as Ojiro opened his mouth to object. I know Midoriya landed on his feet, but she didn't end that sentence, simply taking another sip of her drink. There was silence between the two of them as they sat, the chatter of their former classmates little more than background noise. Finally Ojiro spoke. You know, for an imposter, that raid on the warehouse went really smoothly, he said. Huh? Hagakure responded. I mean, you were up against a whole group of villains, but no one even knew you were there until after you'd already done your part of the plan. I'm sure they could have gotten someone else, she shrugged. But they didn't get someone else. They got you. And from what you told me, you were the reason it went so smoothly. Not only that, but during school, you fought all the same villains that the rest of the class did. I guess. I mean, I didn't really do much compared to Kirishima or Todoroki. Even still, even if the circumstances were questionable, you still became a hero. So regardless what could have been or what should have been, you're here now. You're a hero and a good one at that. You really think so? Hagakure asked hopefully. Absolutely. You deserve to be here as much as any of us. Hagakure sniffled a bit. You're right. Thanks, you know, now that I got it all out in the open like that, I don't really feel so bad about it anymore. Thanks for listening, she said. It's what friends do, Ojiro answered simply, cracking a small smile as Hagakure got out of her chair and wrapped the tailed hero in an invisible hug. In the weeks that followed what came to be known as the beach brawl, Izuku had been forced to re-evaluate every first impression he'd ever had. It wasn't just Uraraka. Every member of the Hell class had gotten at least some media attention, and Izuku had managed to pass judgment on every single one of them during his time at Hamada, only to discover that all of his assessments rested on one single faulty assumption, that Bakugo had been the rule and not the exception. He was utterly ashamed to have ever thought that Uraraka was a passive-aggressive bully, that Ishido only saw heroics as a game, that Kirishima was a yes-man for Bakugo, that Yaoyorozu only made it into UA by throwing around her wealth and probably her something else, that actually he never had an issue with Shinso. But of those students there was one who he just couldn't seem to understand, and that was Todoroki Shudo, better known as the Frostbite hero, Promise. Izuku was always mystified by him, and his classmates always acted weirdly evasive whenever he broached the subject, and explained that Todoroki valued his privacy. Izuku had the day off, so he decided to use the downtime to look into the icy enigma. First thing that puzzled Izuku was the name. It was common knowledge that he was the son of Endeavor, and it made sense to him that the two would have a similar naming scheme. Endeavor named himself that because he endeavored to become the #1 hero. So what promise did Shudo make? The title of the Frostbite hero was one that concerned him. At first he thought it was no more than a cool, intimidating way to allude to his ice quirk, but then he did what he did best and started analyzing his quirk. Midoriya was a little surprised and concerned to discover that the longer a fight dragged on, his movements would get more sluggish, less precise. He was never able to get a close look, but he was beginning to think that the title was literal. Of course, at the time, Izuku had merely shrugged it off, dismissed it as classic UA arrogance. If he was really going to cripple himself with his quirk, if he wasn't going to take his responsibilities seriously, then by all means, he was more than welcome to let reality slap him in the face. A mindset Izuku was trying really hard to break out of. But more important than his name or his quirk's side effects was his quirk itself. It was pretty simple on the face of things. He created ice with his right side and thawed it out with his left. But it couldn't be that simple. His father had one of the most powerful fire-based quirks anyone had seen, so there had to be more to it. So he did some digging for any footage he could find of Shudo, the sports festivals, the Hosu incident, his official debut as Promise, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. He shook his head. There's got to be something I'm missing. So he started watching them all over again, in a different order this time. By sheer luck, he began this second round of viewing with the third-year sports festivals, and he found the abnormality he was searching for in Todoroki's match in the semifinals against one Minoma Nito. He knew Minoma. He was the pro-hero copycat after all. Izuku had to admit, In spite of being part of the school he so deeply despised, he always deeply admired Monoma for his own analytical abilities, no doubt cultivated to facilitate his own quirk. After all, copying a quirk would do him no good if he didn't understand it at a glance. The fight began as most of Shudo's other sports festival fights did, with an overwhelming wave of ice. But by now, most of UA's hero students were used to it. Guess Bakugo isn't the only one who struggled with predictability, Izuku thought as Monoma reflexively dodged it. He wasted no time in closing the gap between the two. For the first sports festival, this was a massive challenge that no one was able to pull off. By this point, it was apparent that Todoroki was a one-trick pony. Izuku figured that the only reason Aizawa never expelled him was because he didn't want any backlash from Endeavor, and the other students more or less knew how to counteract him. They still often fell to his sheer power though. But this time was different. Monoma used the ice to propel himself further into the air and out of Todoroki's range, coming to a landing on Todoroki's left and immediately reaching out and grabbing his arm. This was where things began to feel strange. There was a slight pause as Monoma made contact. It looked as though Monoma had said something, but no words could be heard. Whatever he said, it must have really hit home, since Todoroki immediately responded by unleashing a point-blank avalanche at a size that Izuku only ever saw him use in villain fights. Todoroki was declared the winner, but as he walked away, he turned to say something to Monoma which, again, wasn't picked up. The footage ended there. Izuku frowned, rewinding to the pause right before the finishing blow. He went through it, frame by frame, trying to find something he missed. Then, right before Todoroki made his move, he saw it, a disturbance in the light, forming from Monoma's hand, that disappeared when the wave of ice took over. He replayed those few frames over and over again, tried to listen to what Monoma had said, but to no avail. He was beginning to form a theory, but he had learned his lesson about jumping to conclusions. He'd need help for this one. And so, Izuku called his fiancée. They had been engaged for a while, but Izuku and Mei hadn't yet worked out the logistics of moving in together, since Izuku wanted to stay close to the Slice and Dice Hero agency where he worked, but Mei wanted to live close to Hatsum Industries, or even in the building itself if they could manage it. So it was a fairly long drive for Izuku to reach Hatsum's place, but nothing too bad. "Nice of you to come by, broccoli boy," she greeted with a kiss, which Izuku happily reciprocated. "You got the footage?" "Right here," Izuku replied, holding up a small plain DVD. "Perfect. I've always wanted to use this baby for a big important project," she said, excitedly leading her future husband into a room with a massive TV screen that looked like it was built from the desecrated corpses of gaming computers. "It's not that big a deal." "Are you kidding? Anytime you analyze a pro hero, they're better for it," she said. "Remember when you came up with a workaround for Kaminari's quirk? About using one-way conductive material in his costume and relying more on physical contact. Anyone could have thought of that," Izuku countered bashfully. "But they didn't. You did." Izuku smiled and blushed in response. "Anyway," Hatsum continued, thumbing the elaborate TV hodgepodge, "I bet you're wondering what all this is about. Well, you know how in detective TV shows the police can do that whole zoom in and enhance thing, where they can pick up on stupidly tiny details in photos or security camera footage or whatever?" Izuku nodded. "But decided to make a baby that would let me do that myself." She took the disc from Izuku and inserted it into the TV. The two sat on the large couch across from the screen. Hatsum playfully curled up next to Izuku like they were getting ready to watch a movie, to which Izuku made no attempt to resist. The fight played out on the screen, the increase in resolution easily noticeable to Izuku. Once Monoma made contact, Izuku sat up. Pause the video." Hatsum did so, pulling out a remote control that looked more like an honors math calculator. "I want to hear what Monoma is saying there." "Can you do that?" Izuku asked. "Have a little faith in me," she replied, zooming in on the two boys. Indeed, there was very little grain thanks to Hatsum's device. She pressed a button, rewound a bit, and then let the video play again. Once again, the Monoma on screen grabbed Todoroki. This time, Izuku noticed the expression on Monoma's face. While not the clearest, he seemed to have something dawn on him if his look of realization was anything to go by. Then he spoke. A little muffled but still audible. So you've been holding out on us all this time, eh? He sneered. Before Todoroki's counterattack, Izuku sat up further. Slow down the footage, Izuku said. Something happens here. Mei did so, the video crawling along slowly, giving Izuku the ample time to see a small ball of fire forming in Monoma's hand before it was promptly extinguished. Midoriya stared. So my theory was right. But there's still one thing. He had Mei resume normal speed. As Todoroki walked away from the frozen Monoma, he simply said, "You can thaw yourself out," before stepping off the stage. Mei stopped the video and turned to see Izuku deep in thought. Of course, it all makes sense. Todoroki's quirk is 2 quirks. Well, I mean, probably not literally, but it's a quirk that does 2 things, create fire and ice. The fire would easily counteract the downsides of the ice half. Also, this means that he has to use the fire half to some extent in order to melt the ice afterwards, so the ice is no longer tied to his quirk once it's formed, otherwise Monoma wouldn't be able to thaw it and… I could watch you dissect quirks all day. Mei sighed as Izuku jumped, realizing that he'd once again dove headfirst into the Midoriya mudderch. This answers every question I had about his quirk, he said. But what? Todoroki has one of the most powerful quirks in existence, and yet he's squandering it and only using half of it? There's gotta be a reason. Well, you've been hanging out everyone from that class one way or another, Mei said. You'll get to ask him yourself. I don't know, he seemed to react kind of violently to what Monoma said, but I'll give it a shot next time I meet up with those guys. That chance would come sooner than he thought. The villain sped down the street, her quirk propelling her forward by generating earthquakes behind her. Her loose blonde hair was covered by headgear resembling a black motorcycle helmet. The rest of her armor was a dark silvery color with gold-colored shoulder pads, fingerless gauntlets, and boots. As she literally tore up the streets, traffic began to screech to a halt, horns honking as she made her way over to Neimoidia Bridge, the cracks she made with every step threatening to send the passing cars into the water below. Just as she made it to the center of the bridge, a grappling hook suddenly shot over the side and, from below, popped a figure clad in green padded armor with metallic gauntlets and a metal mouthplate. "Hold it right there," he said, flicking his hands so the gauntlets began to crackle with electricity. "I'm pro-hero sleeper hit. You're under arrest for unauthorized quirk use, destruction of infrastructure, reckless endangerment, and suspected involvement in staging a prison break." "Who are you?" he demanded. "You can call me Epicenter," she said, her accented voice giving her away as American. "I'm what you would call a villain for hire. And yeah, I'm the one who broke all those other villains out. My employer told me the heroes here are much more interesting than the ones back home. So please," she taunted, assuming a fighting stance, "indulge me." The people in the cars began to panic and flee their vehicles, as the road was too broken and unstable to drive on, but there was a dense crowd and they were having difficulty getting through. As they ran past, Izuku ran forward, formulating a plan as he did. "Okay, her quirk can only hit me while I'm on the ground, but there's nothing above me I can swing from. In addition, she can't use it on me in close quarters, since we're on a bridge and she won't risk dropping herself. Chances are she knows that and she'll be able to use her quirk to keep me away. Okay, plan A, use my grapple gun horizontally and pull myself towards her." Pulling out his grapple gun, Izuku aimed to the guardrail just to her left and fired the cable, lifting off just as a shockwave passed under him, tearing up the road and taking out a chunk of bridge behind him. Izuku readied his gauntlet to punch her, but Epicenter reacted just in time to yank on the cable, sending Izuku swinging far out to the side. Izuku quickly detached the cable and brandished a second one, once again aiming at the guardrail. Once the cable was in place, he swung on the cable under the bridge and emerged on the other side. He released the cable and let his momentum bring him closer to her, immune to her quirk since he was completely untethered from the ground. He landed a good solid hit with his gauntlet into her helmet, cracking the visor a bit and sending her recoiling. "Heh." She laughed as Izuku's fist hung in the air where it had struck. Izuku launched a punch with his other hand, but she caught it, and his gauntlet began to shake uncontrollably. Izuku's eyes widened at "Oh crap, I did not think this through." Thinking quickly, he pulled his hand out of the metal gauntlet just as she crumpled it up like paper. With no other option, Izuku collapsed the metal plating on his other gauntlet, folding it back up and leaving him with a black glove. Going bare-knuckled, are we? Epicenter grinned. I like your style, sleeper. The two began to exchange blows with the terrified civilians running past them in either direction, trying to get to safety. Izuku's smaller frame was able to easily dodge her blows, but her metal armor made it hard to do any significant damage to her. Really, her only weak spots were the joints in her neck, but she was a trained fighter, and managed to block each hit aimed there. Finally, Epicenter backed off a bit. You know what? I'm getting bored. Let's spice things up a bit. She raised her fist and slammed it onto the ground, causing the bridge to give way beneath them. Epicenter was able to get back to solid ground quickly, and Izuku was quick on the draw with his grapple gun, but he was too late to stop the cars and people from falling with the bridge. Just then, a cold wind blew through the area as a mass of ice suddenly appeared and formed a new bridge, atop which was Promise, one side of him completely covered in ice. Just in time, Promise, Izuku welcomed. Together we should have no problem taking her down. You can leave this to me, Todoroki said, stepping forward. I can handle this. You go help direct traffic or something. No. I'm staying. The police already have the evacuation under control. Just stay out of my way then, Todoroki insisted. You'll only get in the way if you try to help. Izuku grit his teeth, but backed off anyway. Like it or not, he's a lot stronger than me. You know, you really need to be nicer to your coworkers, Epicenter pointed out. You never know when you'll need them to have your back. She punctuated this by smashing her fist into the bridge and creating a massive wave of spikes that shot up from the asphalt towards Todoroki, who simply surfed on a wave of ice over the spikes. Izuku knew what he was going to do. Promise, wait. The villain, she's going to dash. He didn't listen. With a lethargic sweep of his hand, he threw a massive amount of ice her way, the freezing wave overwhelming her and freezing her there. Todoroki glowered at the frozen villain. You see, sleeper hit? You needn't have bothered dash. Kakrek. The icy prison shattered immediately, Epicenter none the worse for whereas the broke free like it was nothing. Izuku knew this would happen. Promise, that villain's quirk lets her create shockwaves and vibrations on any solid surface. She's got the perfect quirk to counter yours. Your ice isn't going to help. It's better than not having one at all, Todoroki shot back. Izuku flinched, before his shocked expression gave way to anger. Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree after all. Todoroki continued his ineffectual assault on the villain, his ice constantly failing to overwhelm the villain. He was, however, able to use it effectively to defend against her own attack when she used the bridge as a weapon. Izuku, however, noticed a distressing trend. Todoroki's onslaughts were getting weaker and weaker, his movements slower and less precise. It's the cold, he realized. The ice is starting to take its toll on him. Todoroki found himself knocked back towards Izuku, pushed back after blocking a hit from Epicenter's quirk. It was then that Izuku's mind snapped back to his discovery of the hidden side of his quirk. He knew what needed to happen. Promise. Izuku tried again. Your ice isn't going to work. You need to use your fire if you want to beat her. Todoroki flinched, then turned to glare at him. What did you say? I know your ice is only half your quirk, Izuku pressed. Not only is your ice not doing anything, but it's slowing you down. You need to use your fire. Did my father put you up to this? Todoroki growled, seemingly forgetting the villain standing mere meters away. Speaking of, Epicenter began to feel incredibly awkward. This conversation is kinda getting personal, so I'm just gonna go. She quickly turned tail and bolted away. The two heroes stopped their argument and turned to her. Todoroki began to ride a wave of ice after her, but he soon succumbed to the cold, losing focus and falling down to the street below him as his ice crumbled. Izuku once again drew his grappling gun and tried to aim it at Epicenter, but she turned and smashed the ground, creating an instant wall that caused the grappling hook to harmlessly bounce off. Izuku grunted in defeat as Epicenter took off. I told you to stay out of my way, Todoroki spat. But you just had to interfere. How is this my fault? Izuku replied. You could have easily overwhelmed her with your fire. How much? Excuse me? How much is my father paying you? Is that what this is about? Izuku asked. You're holding back, handicapping yourself, only using half of your potential, and letting yourself get frostbite just to spite Endeavor? You know nothing about me or my family problems, Todoroki growled. You're right. I don't know. I have my suspicions, but that's all they are. But there is one thing I do know. He leveled a glare at Todoroki. I know that you were blessed with the perfect quirk, an insanely powerful one that can basically ignore its own downsides just by using the other half of it, and you're only using half of it just to spite your father. Do you have any idea how hard I had to work to make it as a pro without a quirk? I'm always at a disadvantage. I can only win by being smarter, faster, better than my opponent. I would have killed to have a quirk like yours, and you're just throwing it away. Izuku could feel himself getting angrier and angrier. I guess Aizawa was even less competent than I gave him credit for if you're still fighting with one hand tied behind your back. You can prattle on all you want, Todoroki snapped. There is nothing you can say to me that will make me use his quirk. It's your quirk, not his. Izuku shouted, which finally seemed to get a reaction from Todoroki other than frustration and anger. The emotion on his face was shock, as though he had never considered this before. Seeing this, Izuku took a deep breath and collected himself. Todoroki, like I said, I may not know the specifics, but I don't blame you for resenting him. He's the complete opposite of what a hero should be. Endeavor has no regard for property damage or civilian casualties, and lets his quirk run wild and puts people in danger. But you're doing the exact same thing through inaction. You're letting people get hurt because you refuse to fight at full strength. For the longest time, he continued, his voice shaking, I thought the hero course at UA was full of arrogant, self-important fakes. And you know what? I guess I was right about at least one of you. Turning away from a speechless Todoroki, Izuku faced the direction Epicenter took off. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to go after a villain who you could have stopped. With that, Izuku took off after the villain, following the cracked roads, leaving Todoroki to stew. In his thoughts, it's my quirk, not his? But he gave it to me, didn't he? And besides, fire can only destroy. It can only cause pain, can't it? As Shudo's thoughts continued like this, he realized that the ice around him was beginning to melt. Thankfully, the bridge was clear of traffic, so the melting ice didn't pose an issue. But more to the point, he felt feeling return to his cold and numb body as the warmth of his quirk flowed through him. His eyes widened as Izuku's words finally sunk in. It's my quirk, not Endeavor's. But no one else's. He clenched his fist as he readied his ice once again to pursue Izuku. At least now I know where his hero name came from, Izuku thought bitterly. This is sleeper hit. Promise is out of commission and Epicenter got away. She's heading downtown. Requesting backup, he said into his earpiece. Sorry bro, Red Riot responded. We're still tied up with the villain breakout. Some of these guys were with the League and we can't spare anyone else. We'll send a message to evacuate the residential area though. Understood, Izuku said, cutting off the communication before whipping out his grappling hook and launching it at some overhead scaffolding, grateful he had something to swing from for once. Now that he was able to cover much more ground, he was able to catch up to her pretty quickly. Releasing the cable, he quickly unfolded his gauntlet and electrified it as he let himself fall towards her. Epicenter looked back too late and Izuku brought down his trademark taser fist on her armor, sending a jolt of electricity through her as he touched down into a three-point landing. Fighting through the electricity, Epicenter managed to slowly reach a hand for Izuku's gauntlet, forcing Izuku to pull back and avoid having his second gauntlet get destroyed. Now free, Epicenter slammed the ground again and a wave of earth pushed Izuku back. He picked himself back up, fired his grappling hook into the air, and pulled himself up to a nearby apartment building just as another wave was sent his way. As Izuku prepared to drop down and make another attack, Epicenter ran towards the building and slammed her fist into it. The building began to shake, and Izuku's footing became a lot less stable. Finally, the building began to split apart and collapse, sending Izuku falling, only to find himself landing on a cold, slippery slide that gently brought him back down to ground level. On exiting the slide, he rolled into a landing and saw Shudo there, looking none the worse for wear. "Back for round 2, are you?" Epicenter grinned, her helmet cracked enough to show off her pearly whites. "I don't think your ice is going to work any better than it did last time. I'd like to see you try and break this." Shudo fired back as he shot a wall of burning flames at the villain. He stopped it after only a couple seconds, but that was enough time for the metal costume Epicenter was wearing to heat up. "Ow! Ow! Ow!" Epicenter hissed as she quickly began freeing herself from her burning hot armor, the chest plate and gauntlets coming off, leaving her with a black tank top. "Here, let me help you cool off," Shudo said as he once again enveloped her in ice. Izuku was worried she'd break out of it again, but when she didn't, Izuku's eyes widened in understanding. The armor helped resist the cold, but without it, she was starting to go numb from the frigid temperatures, slowing down her quirk massively. She was able to free one arm, but before she could do anything else, she quickly found it wrapped up and pulled by Izuku's grappling gun. She tried to use her quirk on it, but the cable wasn't solid enough to create a quake on, and too taut for it to be properly vibrated. Pressing a button on the grappling gun, Izuku let the cable pull him right to her, as he pulled out a pair of quirk-suppressant HNDCFFS mid-flight. Todoroki, seeing what he was doing, nodded, using his fire side to thaw her out right as Izuku reached her, and in one smooth motion, Izuku slapped the cuffs onto her, bringing her to her knees. Izuku held her in place as Shudo stepped forward as well. Epicenter looked up at the two and chuckled. "Well, I did want a good fight," she admitted. "Can't exactly blame you for delivering." "Sleeper hit, this is Red Riot." The familiar voice came from Izuku's earpiece. "The situation on our end is under control, we're sending backup." "That won't be necessary," Izuku replied. "Promise got backup and Epicenter is taken care of." "Whoa, sweet. I'll have the police swing by your location." "I'd appreciate that." It wasn't long after that the police arrived to take Epicenter away. The two heroes gave their report to the police. Izuku called Mei to let her know that one of his gauntlets needed replacing, and just as he hung up, he became aware of Shudo walking towards him with none of the arrogant posture he had brought to the fight earlier. "I wanted to thank you. And to apologize. I let my own issues get in the way of my work. I was putting civilians at risk because of my family drama, and if it hadn't been for you, I fear someone might have died because of my refusal to go all out. And what I said about your quirklessness, that was uncalled for. Don't worry about it, I forgive you." "Really?" Shudo raised an eyebrow. "Just like that? It's more of an apology than I ever got from Bakugo." "That's right," Todoroki realized as the two walked away from the scene together. "You knew Bakugo, didn't you? Would you mind telling me what happened between you two?" "Only if you tell me the full story of what happened with you and your family." "Fair enough." Like all children, Imari Tengo dreamt of being a hero when he grew up. Like all children, he idolized All Might and all the other famous pros. And like all children, he never once thought that he'd be working as a minimum wage employee in a shoe store. For the 12th time that day, Imari was asked by a customer to use his elongated fingers to grab a shoebox on one of the higher shelves. It wasn't much, but all the same, it was gratifying for his quirk to actually come in handy. As a kid, he was embarrassed by his quirk. All the popular kids had a quirk that was more useful or practical or flashy. Like wings, for example. But him? He could extend his fingers and that was about it. It did eventually dawn on him that the hero track was wishful thinking. Having such a lame quirk was guaranteed to get him relentlessly picked on, but as luck would have it, he had an out. That having a weak, unimpressive quirk made him. Hero work. Acting on a hunch, he zoomed in on one of the watches. It read 4:30 p.m. He zoomed in on another one. 6 a.m. Each and every watch had a different time on it. In fact, a few of them even had a different date on them, tomorrow's date, to be exact. Interesting. Izuku, though, a theory taking shape in his analytical mind. He turned his attention to one copy in particular, holding a steaming cup of W.C. Donald's coffee. Time to go down and test my theory. Before he went back down the vent, however, he made sure to identify the one copy whose watch had the proper date and time. He walked out of the restroom, walking back to the main area as the copy from earlier glared at him. Once the copy wasn't looking anymore, Izuku slowly made his way over to the one holding the coffee, accidentally bumping into him. The coffee spilled onto the Zeitgeist copy's hand, eliciting a hiss of pain as the coffee burned his hand. He whirled on Izuku, who put his hands up. "Whoa, I'm sorry," he said, backing away, strategically moving towards the one he spotted earlier. "Watch where you're going," the copy growled before turning to another. "Why don't we start killing the hostages?" "Fine by me," one of them said. "The police aren't listening to our demands anyway." Izuku looked at that other copy's hand. It looked red and burned, in the exact same place the coffee spilled on the first copy's hand. Perfect. As the copy prepared to use his knife, in one fluid motion, Izuku whirled around, unfolding his right glove into his taser gauntlet and punching the Zeitgeist he identified, the one whose watch actually had the right time, shocking him in the process. The electricity did its work, and it sent him to the ground, unconscious. And like a set of dominoes, the copies just kind of faded out of existence. Even their knives disappeared, though the cups some of them were holding remained in existence and dropped to the floor. One of the police walked up to Izuku as the other patrons breathed a sigh of relief. "Excuse me, sir," the policeman began. "What did dash?" Izuku responded by whipping out his hero license. "I'm pro-hero sleeper hit, officer," he said, completely missing the nearby bystander with the finger-extending quirk, whose eyes went as wide as dinner plates. "I see," the officer said. "I wasn't sure if you were a vigilante or not, just had to be sure. If you don't mind me asking, how did you—" "You see," Izuku began, "that villain's quirk wasn't a duplication quirk like I originally thought. It was actually a low-power time travel quirk. If I'm guessing correctly, he can travel backwards 30 minutes, creating a duplicate of himself. He did this multiple times until he had a small army of himself. Guess that explains why so many of them were chugging coffee and looking really tired. They were awake for almost a full day. I was able to identify and subdue the original Zeitgeist, which paradoxed the copies out of existence since in 30 minutes, he'll be in quirk-suppressant HND-CFFS and unable to go back." He finished giving his statement to the police, who began talking with some of the other hostages. Now that he was more or less alone, he sighed in relief that the situation didn't escalate. He went back to his table only to remember, oh yeah, it got knocked over when Zeitgeist stormed the place. He felt like weeping when he saw his lunch strewn over the floor. I can pay for you to get another one, if you like," a vaguely familiar voice said from behind him. Izuku turned and saw a familiar face he never thought, or hoped, he'd see again. Imari smiled nervously. "Hey Midoriya," he said, knowing there was no turning back now. "Mari," Midoriya said coolly. "It's, nice to see you again. Wish I could say the same." Cold but fair. "So, you're a pro-hero, huh?" he asked, trying to make small talk. No response. Mari sighed. "Look, Midoriya, I just wanted to say that I dash." "Don't," Izuku cut him off. "Don't even start. You just want to get into my good graces now that I'm a pro," he snapped. "What? I dash. Whatever, I don't need this," Izuku grumbled as he walked off. But your lunch though." "Cram it." Imari sighed in defeat as Izuku sauntered off, not bothering to look back. "Yeah. What did I think was going to happen? I helped make his life a living hell. What good is bribing him with food gonna do?" On the plus side, his boss gave him the rest of the day off due to the attack. So that was kinda nice. "Here you are, miss," Imari said, handing the young woman a shoebox from the top shelf, as was his job. It was a pair of shoes themed around Uravity, having the same pink color scheme. The hero-themed shoes were easily the most popular shoes the store had in stock. Well, all except for King Nitro. Just a couple weeks after the mall incident, a massive controversy erupted about quirk discrimination at UA, and shortly afterwards there was an incident in Muzutafu resulting in King Nitro losing his license. After the woman thanked him and headed to checkout, he sighed. In hindsight, he was surprised Bakugo lasted that long. Their old schools had clearly given him a free pass due to being quirk-centric, and as such, Bakugo never grew out of the mindset that the rules didn't apply to him. Guess if UA couldn't fix that about him, they got what was coming to them. "Excuse me," a voice behind him said. "You wouldn't happen to have any red boots around here, would you?" Imari responded as he turned to face the customer. "That's an oddly specific Reku Midoriya?" There he was, the same guy who saved him and then told him off. "Yeah, it's me." "Look, Midoriya," Imari began. Midoriya didn't interrupt him this time, so he took that as his cue to continue. "I'm really, truly sorry about how I treated you. I was trying to avoid getting picked on for my own lame quirk, and, I mean, that's no excuse. I was messed up. I should never have done any of that to you. I was so focused on not being at the very bottom, I didn't realize how badly I was hurting the person I thought was below me, the person I should have known to stand beside. I know you don't forgive me, I just needed to get all that off my chest." A moment passes as Midoriya mulls over his answer. Finally he spoke. "I'm glad that at least one of my old classmates grew up." Imari was a little surprised that was the reply. "Neither of us are the same person we were back in junior high," he continued. "I shouldn't have shot you down like that, back at the food court." "I had it coming," Imari admitted. "That you did, Imari. But you know what, a lot's happened in the past week or so and I have a lot of peace to make." Imari finally dared to get his hopes up. "So, am I forgiven?" "Look, I'm not going to get all buddy-buddy with a former bully of mine. But like I said," Izuku replied, "you're a different person from junior high. And there's really no point holding a grudge against someone who doesn't exist anymore. And unlike a certain someone, you've grown up. So yes, I forgive you," he finished as Imari let out a sigh of relief, feeling a weight lifted from his shoulders. "You still owe me lunch though." Hatsume was humming some obnoxiously catchy tune as she welded some metal plates together. She had quite a bit of free time today. Izuku hadn't had any major cases lately, just a couple petty crimes that were easily dealt with, so his gear didn't have any major maintenance due. Not only that, but she hadn't had any orders for support gear lately. So it was back to her pet project. She wasn't really sure why she continued to work on these things. After all, the original recipient had turned her down, saying his career was more or less over and he'd accepted that. Still, she enjoyed the challenge of putting these things together. And besides, Izuku suggested she keep at it. "Think of it this way," he said once, when Mei asked him for his honest opinion on whether he thought the project was worth continuing. "In our line of work, those sorts of injuries aren't that rare. Chances are, someone's gonna get hurt the same way, they'll want to keep going, and you'll be in the perfect position to help them. Just think about how that would impact Hatsume Industries. You'd be single-handedly responsible for saving a hero's career from certain death. And then there are the civilian applications dash." Of course by that point Izuku had already convinced her, and her motivation had already been rekindled, so she simply shut him up with a kiss, told him she needed to get back to work, and that was that. She wiped the sweat off her brow with a rag and sighed. It was exhausting, the programming difficult to figure out, and the assembly a nightmare, but it was finished. Izuku was right, even if her original idea wouldn't come to fruition, there was no way there wasn't a market for. "Cat loves food, yeah. Cat loves food, yeah." On hearing that familiar ringtone, she moved the rag to her left hand and picked up her phone. "You've reached Hatsume Industries. How can I direct your call?" "I'm sorry, I could have sworn this was your personal number." "Oh, Tensei," she said, recognizing the voice. "It is, I just greet everyone like that. What's up?" "It's Tenya," the retired pro explained. He woke up from his coma this morning. On the day of the Hell class's first sports festival, Ida Tensei, aka the pro hero Ingenium, was attacked and paralyzed by the hero killer. Shortly afterwards, during the class's internships, his younger brother and hero-in-training Ida Tenya went AWOL to hunt down the hero killer and avenge his brother. Not only did he fail to stop the hero killer from murdering another pro-hero, native, but he himself was heavily injured. He nearly died from the blood loss alone, but in addition, Stain did severe damage to the young man's spine. The only things preventing him from ending the student's life right then and there were the gnomes sent by the League of Villains to attack the city. Miraculously, Ida survived, but by the time he was found and given medical attention, he had already slipped into a coma, where he remained for 4 years. When he woke up, word spread through his former class like wildfire and his hospital room was swarming with visitors, though after their first disastrous attempt to crowd into his room at once they started visiting him individually. The most frequent visitor Ida got was Uraraka. During their time as classmates, the two had gotten along pretty well, and it more or less started during their first heroics class. They had been assigned as the villains during that first exercise, with the opposing hero team being Bakugo and Jiraiya. To say it was an absolute disaster would be an understatement. "So, this is the bomb," Uraraka muttered as she picked up the deceptively light prop. "All right, what's the plan?" "Isn't it obvious?" Ida said, trying to make his voice sound more sinister and failing miserably. "We wait here, and when the heroes arrive, we'll hold the line until it's over." "I don't think that'll work," she said. "Bakugo's got a really powerful explosion quirk, and while both of us have effective short-ranged quirks, I think he'll be able to overpower us pretty easily. Plus, I can't get close enough to remove his gravity." "I could keep him distracted and you sneak up on him," Ida suggested. "But then there's Jiraiya. If she's around, she'll be able to stop me. Then we'll divide and conquer," Ida proclaimed. "Bakugo is clearly looking for a fight, so I'll give him one. If I understand Jiraiya's quirk correctly, she'll be able to find you and sneak to your location without Bakugo noticing. Then you can get the drop on her. Once she's done, I can return to your location where we'll have him outnumbered 2-1. Uraraka finished as she put the pieces together. "Then we can capture him, or at least hold him until the time runs out." "Sounds like a plan to me," Uraraka nodded. "Let's do this." "Okay, once we're in, I'll use my quirk to find them," Jiraiya said. "If they're in the same room talking to each other, it's a safe bet the bomb is there. If they aren't, I'll listen to their footsteps and we'll split up. Are you even listening?" Bakugo didn't respond, flexing and unflexing his fingers as he glared at the entrance. "Hey, Bakugo!" "Shut up, extra," Bakugo snapped back. "You're breaking my concentration." "We're supposed to be working together," she pointed out. "Like I need your help to take on these weaklings," he replied. "You may now enter the building," All Might said over the speaker. Jiraiya opened her mouth to speak, but before she could get the first syllable out, Bakugo blew past her into the building. "Hey, wait," she called, but Bakugo was either having a hard time hearing her over the sound of his explosions, or he just didn't care. Probably both. Jiraiya groaned and used her quirk, plugging her earphone jack into the wall to listen for anything. She forced herself to ignore the sound of Bakugo blasting through the halls. When she heard it, the sound of Ida's engines tearing across the 4th floor, afterwards descending to the 3rd floor. "I think they're trying to cause a distraction," Jiraiya realized. "Ida will draw away Bakugo and keep him from getting to the bomb. That means Uraraka is probably waiting at the bomb." She ran up the stairs, up to the 2nd floor, then the 3rd. As soon as she reached the 3rd floor, she was caught off guard by a loud explosion just a couple rooms to her left. "Get back here, extra!" Bakugo shouted. "You'll never catch me, hero!" Ida replied, evidently taking his role as villain super seriously. Not wanting to pull the pin on her walking grenade of a teammate by interfering in the fight, she resumed her original plan of using stealth. However, she encountered a bit of a hiccup when she tried using her quirk in the stairwell leading to the 4th floor. Bakugo and Ida were fighting so close to her that there was too much interference, and she couldn't pinpoint Uraraka's location. "Gotcha!" With a surprised yelp, Jiraiya was too late to react as Uraraka dropped from above and kicked Jiraiya to the ground. "Sorry about this," the pink-clad girl quickly apologized as she whipped out the capture tape and tied Jiraiya's hands, taking her out of action. Jiraiya has been captured by the villain team. Below, Ida took this as his cue. With a burst of speed, he turned and dashed away from Bakugo, ignoring the blonde's indignant yelling. It was time for Phase 2 of the plan he and Uraraka had put together. With Jiraiya taken out, it was 2 against 1. But since Ida and Uraraka stood no chance of taking on Bakugo head-on even if they worked together, They decided to use their numerical advantage to play defensively, blocking off access to the bomb and stalling until the timer ran out. The two made it back to the bomb before Bakugu, thankfully. Just as they managed to secure the room, Bakugu came in. With a growl, he tried to force his way into the room, but Ida managed to force him back out by charging at him at top speed, not giving him a chance to react before the blonde was thrown across the hall. He got up and tried again, trading blows with his armored opponent, his gauntlets protecting him as he struck Ida's armor. He let out an explosion that knocked Ida down, and he made a mad dash for the bomb. Suddenly, he found himself unable to move and realized he was floating. He turned his head once he figured out which way was up and saw Uraraka. Seeing red, he prepared another explosion, but since he was still weightless, he wound up propelling himself in the complete opposite direction from where he wanted to be. Release! Uraraka touched her fingers together as Bakugu rocketed away, landing hard and skidding a fair distance away. Ida was all ready with the capture tape, but Bakugu used his explosions to launch himself back up and land another punch on Ida, who barely had time to block. However, Bakugu quickly realized that the bomb was no longer in the room. Uraraka had made the thing weightless so she could carry it at a full sprint down the hall. What's more, Ida had blasted off to join her, having realized that getting the capture tape on Bakugu was a futile endeavor. They resolved to keep playing defensively and run out the timer. Bakugu picked up on this fact. Four Eyes wasn't the worst at hand-to-hand combat, but they both knew in a protracted fight, Bakugu would win eventually. A grim smile came to his lips as he planned his next move. If I have it right, we just need to hold out for a couple more minutes, Uraraka said. We just need to keep him from getting in until then. Just then, Bakugu confidently strode towards the room which now housed the bomb. Hey, extras. I'm gonna win this right here, right now. Yeah, right, Uraraka shot back. No way we're gonna let you in here. Who said anything about me coming in? He retorted. He held up one of his gauntlets. Thing about my quirk is that it comes from my sweat. These gauntlets here store up all the excess for me to fire off later, he explained. And I've had a lot of time to work up a good sweat. He grabbed the pin on his grenade-shaped right gauntlet and pulled it out. Bakugu, stop. Do not fire your gauntlets. You could seriously injure Dash. Unfortunately, All Might didn't get to finish his warning. Kirkum. Uraraka groaned as she sat up. She blearily took note of where she was and remembered that she was in Recovery Girl's office, laid down on a bed. Oh right. She looked around and saw Ida, similarly incapacitated, on another bed that had been wheeled in. The sun was starting to set, resulting in a reddish glow filling the room. Good to see you're awake, dearie, Recovery Girl said pleasantly. Once your friend here wakes up, I just need to look you both over a bit and then you can go. Here, have a gummy. Uraraka nodded as she took one. Oh, and congratulations on your victory. Huh. Uraraka reacted with a start. We won? But how did we dash? On a technicality, yes, but you still won. If that had been a real scenario, then where would Bakugu's actions have led? Uraraka's eyes widened in realization. Letting off such a massive explosion in the same room as a nuclear warhead would be the literal worst thing to do in that scenario. No wonder he'd gotten disqualified. I saw the footage. You and your friend played your parts perfectly, Recovery Girl continued as they heard a stirring from the other side of the room. Ida sat up and opened his eyes slowly. After Recovery Girl had made sure they healed properly and filled some forms, they were free to go. The two were the only students left in the building, so it was just the two of them walking to the train station. You did a great job today, Uraraka said, not wanting to walk in awkward silence. As did you, the taller bespectacled boy replied. I fear that I didn't get into character as well as I would have liked, but it was an enlightening experience. To see such a situation from the perspective of the villain has done wonders to make us more familiar with a villain's mindset, a skill which will greatly benefit us as heroes. That must be the true hidden genius of this test. Uraraka giggled, knowing full well All Might literally just drew names out of a hat, but said nothing. After their ordeal at Bakugu's hands, she'd let him have this. I think we work pretty well together, you know, she asked. I couldn't agree more, Uraraka-san, he replied as they arrived at the station and had to part ways. You can just call me Ochako if you want. Alright, Uta. I'll see you tomorrow. Same to you. I can't wait to train. Alongside you, Tenya. And so here they were now, catching up like old friends in a hospital room 4 years later. Wait, how many classmates wound up in the top 50? Ida asked incredulously. He had just returned to his hotel room after a session of physical therapy, and Uraraka had just dropped in for a friendly visit. I know, it's kind of insane, but it makes sense, Uraraka replied. Those villains from the USJ came back in force, and they wound up being the real deal. Indeed, the League of Villains was an annoying thorn in the Hell class's side throughout their time at UA. They weren't slowed down whatsoever when their leader, All for One, was killed in his battle with All Might, who later succumbed to his own injuries. Sure, they were running around like chickens with their heads cut off, but that just made them more unpredictable and more dangerous in some ways. They kept targeting us for reasons that are beyond me, though they seem to keep going after Kirishima for some reason. Anyway, all those high-profile villain battles kind of dragged us into the limelight, kicking and screaming, and now, everyone knows about the Hell class. Well, let me just say that I am so happy for all of you. Ida said. Uraraka felt the urge to giggle as Ida attempted to make that chopping hand motion he always did whenever he got passionate about things, but he looked like it was real uncomfortable and a little painful to do, so she immediately felt guilty. Muscle memory shot, huh? Indeed. Physical therapy has been an ordeal. The two sat in silence for a moment before Uraraka asked another question. Do you think you'll go back to UA once you recover? The question confused him. Aren't I expelled? He asked. I disobeyed direct orders from the hero I was interning with, ran off on my own after a villain during a crisis, and tried to kill him. Why wouldn't Aizawa expel me? Funny story, we asked Aizawa the same thing. He said he didn't want to make it official until you were conscious enough to answer for your actions. But since he doesn't teach at UA anymore, that's no longer an issue. Aizawa-sensei is no longer at UA? Ada asked, surprised. Why not? Oh wow, you mean I never told you about Sleeper Hit? Uraraka gasped. Who's that? A villain? The opposite, actually. He's a pro hero. Remember that green-haired kid from the first day? The one who failed the quirk test? The one who dash. The one who saved you from the zero-pointer, Ida realized in awe. When the ground started shaking and the massive robot appeared, Ida did the thing that most sane people would do. Run in the opposite direction. Of course, he was not most people. He was applying to train to be a hero, which is also not most people. But Present Mike had made it perfectly clear, there was nothing to be gained from taking the thing on. So he ran. Most of the other examinees had the exact same idea, running for dear life. But in the corner of Ida's peripheral vision, he saw a green blur dash in the opposite direction of the crowd. Ida recognized him as the disruptive kid from the written exam, and the one who he had caught trying to throw off that brunette's focus. Whatever is his damage? He thought to himself, until he traced the green boy's path and realized where he was running and why. Trapped beneath rubble, directly in the path of the hulking tank, was that aforementioned brunette. Is he? He shook his head. No way is he going to try to take on the zero-pointer. He was correct, at least at first. Midoriya Izuku had no intention of going up against a massive building-sized robot with nothing but a grappling hook and a dream. He fired said grappling hook, assembled from spare parts he found cleaning up Dagoba and with the help of a tutorial he found online, and swung over one of the many light poles that lined the fake city and swung towards her. He quickly landed near her and bent down to try and lift the rubble pinning her legs. Artie, your quirk is zero gravity, right? Can you use it on the rubble? Can't. She weakly managed. Broke one of my fingers, my other hand is stuck too. I getcha. He scanned the area. He looked at her, then the rubble, then the zero-pointer, and got an idea. Just sit tight. He jammed the prongs of the grappling hook underneath the rubble trapping Uraraka's legs, took the other end in his hand, and both Uraraka and Ida both watched with a mix of fascination and horror as he ran directly towards the zero-pointer. If I'm going to get the leverage I need for this plan to work, I'm gonna need height. But I can't throw the hook while it's attached to that piece of rubble. The only way I'm getting the momentum I need is to climb up the zero-pointer. silently thinking about how grateful he was for learning parkour along with his cleanup of Dagoba Beach. He scaled the sides of the robot's massive legs. The hulking behemoth took no notice of the ant trying to climb it, and when Izuku had enough height, he targeted the nearest light pole and kicked off, pressing a button on the grappling hook and withdrawing the slack as he fell. The cable went taut over the light pole and yanked hard on the rubble, Izuku's weight and falling speed producing enough force to lift the debris off Uraraka. It didn't keep it in the air forever, but it lifted it up enough that Uraraka was able to scramble away. Once it fell back down and Izuku retracted the grappling hook, he ran like crazy, using the hook to make his getaway, since it was faster than running. However, as he swung into the air via one of those light poles, Izuku's heart stopped as he heard a snap. The cable of his grappling hook immediately went slack as it detached from the grapple gun, followed by a couple of key parts that held it together. Izuku cursed himself for putting too much strain on a homemade device made out of literal garbage, and helplessly started plummeting to the ground, bracing himself for the inevitable impact. Said impact felt a lot more like a hand slapping him, and he was more surprised when the sudden loss of momentum didn't break every bone in his body, and he just realized that Uraraka had used her quirk on him to stop his fall. "Time's up!" Present Mike shouted over the loudspeaker. The massive robot slowed to a stop as Uraraka hunched over and started throwing up. Ida just watched on in admiration. If this had been a real battle and not an exam, he might have done the same thing. He would later kick himself for that line of thought when he got his acceptance letter and learned about rescue points, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, he enrolled in another school and he wound up being a pro hero and... "Hey, are you okay?" Uraraka asked, concerned, noting that Ida had gone quiet. Ida sighed. "I don't think I ever apologized to him," he said. "I misjudged his actions at the entrance exam and singled him out in front of everyone, when he was the only one who saw the test for what it was, and I didn't have the chance to talk with him before he was expelled." "Well, I'm sure he barely remembers," she said, before reconsidering. "Either that or he's been harboring an obsessive grudge all this time. 50-50 shot." "I see." They remained in silence for a bit. "In answer to your question," he said finally, "I would like to resume the hero track, but I can't. Even after physical therapy is done, it would take me years to get back to where I was. All the years' worth of muscle memory for controlling my quirk is gone. There's no way I'll be fighting fit in any realistic length of time." Before Uraraka could reply, someone else barged into the room. "Hey, is this the right room? Your brother told me, but I forgot to write it down, and I barged into like 3 rooms before this one, but then I overheard what you just said and I realized my timing couldn't have been better," Hatsum May stated as she walked in like they owned the place. Considering one of the last things Ida remembered before his coma was his utter humiliation at her hands during the sports festival, he panicked a bit, flinching away. "Hatsum-san, what are you doing here?" Hatsum grinned, seemingly oblivious to how uncomfortable Ida was in her presence. "I just wanted to say hi to you, it's been a really long time. But also, I heard you want to get back to Hero ING and I've got a baby in the works that'll really help. I actually made it for your brother but he didn't want it, and I'd hate to see it go to waste." "I think I'll pass on that," Ida said nervously, not wanting to be subjected to any more of her babies in his condition. "Oh, don't worry," she said, her tone softening a little. "There won't be any explosions or anything, I promise. That's a Hatsum Industries guarantee." Ida looked over at Uraraka. "Hatsum Industries? Yeah, it's a thing now." "I see. Hatsum-san, I appreciate the offer, but after what happened at the sports festival dash." "Oh, right," she said, remembering. "I getcha. Don't worry, I'm not going to use you as advertising this time. When I first designed it for your brother, I wanted to use this baby for publicity to get my support company off the ground. But he turned it down, but said he'd pay me to design it for you, so I kept working on it and it just felt wrong of me to take advantage of you like that again. That, and I don't really need the free advertising anymore. If you don't want my help, that's totally fine." Ida was taken aback. Was this really the same Hatsum May who had used him as a commercial back at the sports festival? He mulled it over and sighed. "Oh well, what have I got to lose? You know what, I accept your offer." May's trademark domineering grin suddenly returned to her face. Glad to hear it. I'll see you once you're discharged from the hospital, and we can get to work. So, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly is this baby, anyway? She simply smiled. It's a surprise. A month passed before Ito was finally discharged from the hospital. He was able to eat, walk, and do most of his normal activities, but getting back into fighting form was going to be a challenge, one that Hatsum had assured him she would handle. After finally spending some time at home, the time came for him to go to Hatsum's workshop. So, first thing you gotta know, Hatsum explained, a lot of this stuff was my fiancé's idea. Your fiancé? Who in their right mind would agree to marry? No, stop it, Tenya, you're being rude. Yeah, the guy's in love with quirk theory. Anyway, after what happened to your brother, he noticed that a lot of heroes have difficulty with quirk control after getting injuries like yours. Quirks have their own muscle memory separate from the normal kind, since each quirk is different and all. He came up with the idea for constructing a leg brace geared towards your quirk that would use data gathered from the recordings of you at UA to help you redevelop your old moves, by using controlled bursts of quirk stimulants and quirk suppressants to match what you were able to pull off before your injury. The whole point is to simulate and accelerate the repetition of your quirk-related moves so you can perform them second nature. She reached under her desk and pulled out a pair of devices that, indeed, looked like they would fit around Ida's legs and knees, with openings designed to match his exhaust pipes. There was some wiring and gadgetry on the inside. I just need to install the algorithm I programmed into this thing, put it on and... The door to the workshop opened and in walked a bruised but otherwise energetic Izuku. There you are, May. I heard he finally got discharged. That MLA copycat took all week to deal with, so I missed. He saw Ida there, and the two made eye contact. Ida remembered this guy being much more meek and, for lack of a better word, wimpy at the entrance exam. Both he and May had grown up a lot. And here he was, having slept through what should have been a defining time of his life had he not made such a horrible mistake. And he felt so out of place there. But he was pulled out of his ruminations when he offered him his hand. Ida Tenya, right? He asked. Midoriya Izuku. We've met, Ida observed, shaking his hand. Not properly, Izuku said. I have the worst luck with first impressions. Now that we're all acquainted, Hatsum interrupted, I think it's high time we get to work. Ida Tenya, your hero rehabilitation has officially begun. Even though he was discharged from the hospital, Ida's physical therapy was not over. In fact, it only got more grueling from here on out. And while the device did indeed speed up the process of retraining his quirk, that didn't mean it was instant. Despite this, Ida insisted he'd push through. Ida once again circled the large, gray room. May had this large, sturdy, relatively empty testing room installed in the basement level of her building for the purpose of testing her babies, but was willing to let Ida use it to get his quirk back into gear in a controlled environment. His stamina had been recovering quite well, along with his quirk control, but he once again hit a wall of exhaustion and went to take a rest. Through all this, his relationship with Izuku was strictly professional, as Izuku essentially acted as a part-time quirk-specific physical therapist when he wasn't busy with a case, and they didn't have much time to talk. May was around much more, but Ida still gave her a wide berth, a decision May fully understood. It hit Ida again just how much she had matured since the sports festival. He sighed again at the reminder of just how much he had missed. He began thinking of the most troubling development he'd been unconscious for. I don't believe it, Ida said, voice shaking as Uraraka concluded her account. I always knew Aizawa's methods were strict, but he purposely sabotaged him. Apparently, yeah, Uraraka shrugged, smiling sadly. I never thought. After all he went through to protect us at USJ, how could he? Ida was at a loss for words as he stared off into space, struggling to comprehend this. Ida Tenya had been born into a family deeply rooted in heroics, which may or may not have given him special treatment throughout his pre-UA school days. Hosu notwithstanding, he never once thought to question the decisions of authority figures. It just didn't occur to him that anyone in that position would make such a blatantly wrong call, since for most of his life those around him had been heroes themselves. To his eternal regret, when Aizawa had expelled Midoriya, who, based on the entrance exam, had more heroic potential than many of the applicants, he didn't give that incident a second thought, despite all the respect he had for him following the exam. He just assumed that Aizawa knew something he didn't and rolled with it, and even said as much when Uraraka vented about it to him a few days before the sports festival. Yeah, Shinso took it pretty hard. Not as hard as Kirishima though after, well you know. Pious. Bakugu, Ida said, adjusting his glasses with none of the practiced precision he once had. Forgive me for sounding judgmental, but I can't help but feel we really should have seen that coming. You know what? Uraraka said, again chuckling sadly, can't say I disagree. We all saw the way he acted, but Kirishima was always willing to go to bat for the guy, and I guess we all just kinda assumed he lashed out the way he did because of the way he blamed himself. Blamed himself? Ida asked, confused. For what? He certainly showed no remorse for his actions from what you told me. Uraraka drew in a sharp breath as her eyes widened. You mean, no one told you? Told me what? Ada asked, concerned. Did he rather not? She began, but sighed. No, you'll hear about it eventually. He blamed himself for getting All Might killed. And boy, hadn't that been a wake-up call for Ida. It was with that revelation that he realized, for the first time since his awakening, that the world he knew was long gone. It had been a bitter pill to swallow, and he still wasn't completely over the shock. Living in a world where he missed how it got there didn't help ease the emptiness either. He felt perpetually lost, like he was charging forward at blinding speed with no idea where he was. You okay? May's curious words brought Ida back to the present. I suppose. Ida sighed as May sat next to him. I don't blame you, she said, for feeling down. You did essentially jump forward in time. If you had just shrugged it off, then I'd be really worried. I've been hearing about all my former classmates and seeing what they've been doing. Uraraka, Kirishima, Yaoyorozu. They've become such great heroes, and I think, was I supposed to be that? Was I even capable of getting there? I acted so foolishly at Hosu. Not heroic at all. Hey, you were a teenager. We all did stupid stuff. You're not helping, Ida replied with a glare. Sorry, May quickly replied, looking apologetic, an emotion Ida was really unused to seeing on May, which once again reminded him of how much had changed and… Ugh! Ida groaned, his head between his hands as his thoughts circled the same few points once again. No matter how hard I try, I'm caught in a downward spiral of negativity and I can't escape. May. I'm back. A cheerful, out-of-breath voice called from around the corner as Izuku entered the room. Ida looked up and waved as May got up and hugged him. May sniffed him a couple times, scrunching her face at the evidently foul smell. Ugh, poison gas quirk? Chlorine specifically. Rusted right through my gear, he lamented, holding up his gauntlets, which were now blood red and rough, not to mention frozen in position. Still beat him though, even if my lungs feel like they're about to secede from my body after all the time I spent holding my breath. That's good to hear. Need me to replace your gear? You don't even have to ask, Izuku replied, already handing her a small pile of rusted tech and bits of armor. I'll be right back with that, she said, heading for the elevator, not even pausing as Izuku leaned forward to kiss her but missed completely. Yeah, sorry, May apologized insincerely as Izuku tried to recover from completely whiffing on the kiss, but you smell like a bucket of bleach. Why don't you chat with Ida? She added as she made her exit. I think he could use someone to talk to. Not like you're going anywhere. As the elevator doors closed, Izuku made his way to the despondent speedster and sat next to him where May had been. So, how are the leg braces working for you? He asked hesitantly, trying to break the ice a bit. I haven't had any problems yet, Ida said. If he was put off by the smell, he didn't say anything about it. They're working fine. The rehabilitation is going smoothly. Looks to me like it hasn't, Izuku observed. Emotionally, I mean, mentally. Another heavy sigh. I don't know what to do. I can't exactly help you there, Izuku said. I'm no therapist. Midoriya? Can you be honest with me about something? Shoot. Do you think I can still be a hero? Izuku looked taken aback, if only for a bit. Of course. What brought this on? You are aware of what put me in that coma, right? I think I got the gist of it. The hero killer went after your brother, you went after him while you were interning with Manuel, and you got a sword through the spinal column for your trouble. So you're aware, then, that I was consumed by thoughts of revenge in a manner that hardly suits a hero. But you weren't a hero, Izuku observed. You were a hero student. And it's not like you were the only one with issues. Todoroki, for example. I suppose that's fair. Ida sighed again, a sound Izuku was starting to become incredibly familiar with. But I'm worried it's too late for me. If it's about age, I should point out you looked like you were college-bound compared to the rest of the class anyway. It's not that, UA was when I was supposed to become the person I was always supposed to be, and I just missed it. Due to my own stupidity. Do you want to be a hero? Izuku asked bluntly. Yes, of course I do. Ida said resolutely, if a bit confused at the change in subject. Why? Come again? Why do you want to be a hero? Ida was caught off guard by the question. He hadn't really given it much thought as of late, since he always thought he knew the answer, to live up to his family name, simple as that. But his religious devotion to upholding the Ida name had led him on his ill-advised manhunt, so that was hardly a good answer. All it had done was lead him to make the worst mistake of his life, and it was all he could do to wait. I suppose, Ida answered experimentally, I want to redeem myself from my actions. Izuku gave a genuine grin. I have heard so many worse reasons than that. Hold on to that, he said. You messed up royally, there's no getting around that. But don't let it weigh you down. Use it as fuel. Even if you can't forgive yourself just yet, if you've realized you made a mistake in the first place, you're already leaps and bounds above someone I know who shall remain nameless. And besides, he added, his expression falling a bit, I've had my share of mistakes as well. Not anywhere as severe as yours admittedly, but I was really bitter and mistrusting for the longest time and I constantly pushed people away. I'm trying to do better. I'm already a hero, and I'm still trying to do better. So I don't think you have anything to worry about. But, you're all so far ahead of me. This isn't a race, Izuku continued. And even if it was, you haven't lost, you've just been moved to a different track. What I'm trying to say is, it's not too late to course correct. Neither of them was totally sure when Izuku stood back up and began talking louder. If you keep striving towards your goal of feeling forgiven, then one way or another, you'll become the hero we all know you can be, because whether you believe me or not, you can be a hero. There was silence between the two of them as Izuku blinked. He wasn't totally sure where that came from, but looking at Ida, it seemed to have worked. Thank you, Ida said, for your kind words. You're a capable speaker, Midoriya, if I do say so. I half expected those words to come out of All Might. Izuku scratched the back of his head, flattered. Yeah, well, his ability to give people hope was what made me want to be a hero in the first place. Izuku's phone buzzed and he took it out of his pocket. Oh, sorry to cut it short, Izuku said, but the agency needs me for something. I understand, Ida nodded. Thank you again for your encouragement. Anytime, Izuku replied, grinning widely as Ida was nearly blinded by his smile. It's what heroes do. Even though he had been reassured over and over again he was fine, Ida still felt out of place as he walked up to the exam. Now, Netsu had talked to Ida at the tail end of his rehabilitation to explain his situation. Even though he had been admitted to the school once before, Netsu told him he needed to prove that he was in fighting shape once again. Retaking the exam wouldn't be a possibility because if he knew about rescue points going in, it would defeat the entire purpose of the exam. His only option was the recommendation exam. Luckily for him, Uravity, Sleeper Hit, and a couple other former classmates were willing to get him in. His situation was no surprise to UA, since the Ida family had been working things out with the school for months now. You're not still worrying, are you? Uraraka asked as Ida looked up at the intimidating structure that was familiar, yet terrifying all the same. No, Ida assured her. I never thought I'd get a second chance at this, or that I'd need one in the first place. The brunette patted him on the shoulder, careful to not let all 5 fingers touch. I have faith in you, she said. You made it once, you can make it again. I suppose you're right. He adjusted his glasses. Even though his quirk hadn't completely returned to the way it was before his injury, he was able to hold his own sparring against Uraraka. If he could last against a pro, even one relatively new like her, he could make it through UA. Right then. I'll be back, he said. I'll be cheering you on, Uraraka smiled. Me, Midoriya, Hatsum, Kirishima, Yaozu, we're all rooting for you and we can't wait to work alongside you. It's gonna be a long 3 years for us, that's for sure. I'll try not to keep you waiting too long, Ida said, allowing himself a smile before he turned to walk into the testing center. The nervousness faded almost completely because no matter what happened, he had good friends in his corner. And that was more than enough to keep him going.